Chapter 941. Without any precaution or mental preparation, that person disappeared from their sight. The crowd did not even see how Yun Nuoshing attacked. When they finally reacted, a black ice spear emitting a bone-chilling aura appeared in their line of sight. It was so cold that countless people in the pavilion were stunned. Some people looked at the figures on the third floor with a hint of mockery in their eyes. Some people respected them, and some people were unhappy with them. Now that they saw Lu Bai being humiliated, their gazes became even more playful. The surrounding people who originally did not intend to watch also became interested. They all became onlookers and quietly watched the situation unfold. While the crowd looked at Lu Bai and the others with ridicule, there were also many people who stared at Yun Nuoshing with vigilance. Many people felt a strong threat from that black ice spear. This time, he had only launched half of his attack, and the other half had probably been withdrawn. If he had really unleashed it, this place would not be like this anymore. The two people in front of Lu Bai also straightened up and looked at each other. They could see the seriousness in each other's eyes. Lu Bai also put away his contempt. It seemed that the witch had found a helper from who knows where, and he seemed to be a little powerful. Lu Bai took a step forward and walked to the edge. Half of his body was clearly visible to the crowd. He cupped his fists at Yun Nuoshing and the others and smiled faintly. He said unhurriedly, "I am Lu Bai of the Lu family of Lingwu City. May I know where this friend is from?" The Lu family of Lingwu City was a family in the central city of the Kuan Yuan region. Although it was not a superforce, it was not too bad. In Shuiyun City, it was an existence that could dominate a region. Moreover, that person just now seemed to be talking about young Master Lu. In other words, this Lu Bai might have a high position in the Lu family. Judging from the many people who were observing the situation, many people had heard of his name. Yun Nuoshing opened her mouth and let out a small yawn. Her pretty face was filled with a bored expression. Just as she was about to casually reply, Yuan Shi, who was beside her, smiled wickedly and said, "Just a few kittens and puppies, what's there to talk about?" Yun Nuoshing and the others chuckled in their souls. "Little cat, the young master of the Yuan family of the Divine Land?" Yuan Shi rolled his eyes. "Aren't you, the young hall master of the Nine Deities Palace, a little kitten too?" Lu Bai's expression froze, and the people around him started to pay more attention to the situation. This was going to be fun. Lu Bai was the one who was talking about little kitty and puppy. Now, the person he sent out was killed by little kitty and puppy before he could even say a word. Lu Bai's face turned gloomy. Just as he was about to say something, the nightmare spoke first. "Hey, you idiot, I advise you to keep your mouth shut. You're disturbing our rest. My lady might bite you." Yun Nuoshing's face was filled with black lines, and everyone's expression was also sluggish. Seeing that the former did not say anything, as if he had tacitly agreed, the word arrogance was immediately imprinted on him. In fact, he just did not know what to say and remained silent. His few lines had already been suppressed to death by the two troublemakers, Yuan Shi and Mo Yen. The teacup in his hand also emitted a cracking sound. A moment later, even that sound disappeared. Some white powder quietly drifted down from his tightly clenched fist. After which, he clapped his hands with an icy expression and slowly stood up. He looked at Chu Yingzhan and said, "Although I do not know where you found this group of helpers, do you think that you can do whatever you want in the Kuan Yuan region with just them?" Chu Yingzhan's expression was extremely cold. She stared at Chu Yingzhan and said, "Although I do not know where you found this group of helpers, do you think that you can do whatever you want in the Kuan Yuan region with just them?" As he stood up slowly, a somewhat oppressive aura slowly flowed out of his body. The atmosphere in the pavilion suddenly froze, and everyone's expression froze. Was this guy going to make a move? A son of God, probably at the 5th level. Calculating based on age and time. How did you trick a beginner god? Yun Nuoshing looked indifferently at Chu Yingzhan. When she was at the demigod level, she had made a son of God suffer. Although he did not know how she did it, it was not very strange. When he was in Yuanguang, he knew a few people who had killed a son of God when they were at the peak of the demigod level. He guessed that they were the kind who risked their lives. As for those sons of God who were killed by demigods at the peak of the demigod level, he was not too clear about the difference between them and this young supreme version of a son of God. Anyway, to Yun Nuoxing, there was not much difference between the sons of God who had not reached the middle or high level. The only difference was that killing a son of God required a flick of the finger, while killing a god emperor required a flick of the hand. Chu Yingzhan pondered for a moment, and counted in detail with her slender fingers. Sneak attack, cheating, hidden trap, backstabbing, bludgeoning, sneak attack, groin kick, poking eyes, pepper spray, sowing discord. After hearing this, Yun Nuoxing and the others broke out in cold sweat. They looked at her as if they had seen a ghost, and then quietly moved their seats. This guy. What was this called? Lu Bai was a son of God, and he was beaten to the ground by a little girl at the demigod level in all kinds of unimaginable ways. If this happened to them, it would be a dark history that they would not want to recall for the rest of their lives. It was no wonder that their faces were dark. If they did not vent their anger, they would be suffocated to death. Lu Bai looked down at Chu Yingzhan with his cold eyes, and the majestic power spread from above to below. The space seemed to have solidified, and waves of divine energy pressure fell from the sky, making many people feel a little heavy. However, when this pressure fell on Yun Nuoxing and the others, it was as if nothing happened. The space within 3 feet of them was completely stable. Not to mention the pressure, even the air did not change at all. The group of people still looked calm. Interesting. Lu Bai sneered, and his eyes suddenly became sharp. He waved his hand and was about to attack. Although it is not interesting, if you don't remove the pressure, I don't mind reasoning with you. Yun Nuoxing's clear voice quietly spread throughout the pavilion. This was the first time she had spoken here, and it made everyone slightly stunned. They all turned their eyes, only to see Yun Nuoxing slowly raising her left hand and making a gesture of snapping her fingers. Everyone was stunned. What was the meaning of this action? However, Xian and the others reacted quickly. They hurriedly took out something from their space containers to cover their heads. With your strength of a demigod? Lu Bai laughed angrily. He waved his hand, and his divine energy fluctuated. He pressed his hand down from above. Ta! The moment Lu Bai waved his hand, Yun Nuoxing gently rubbed her 2 fingers together. A soft snapping sound spread through the space, and a few ripples appeared in the space. Then, the entire space quieted down, and a wisp of snowflakes fell from the sky. This was the true meaning of silence. This entire space was completely silent. There was no longer any energy fluctuation. Even the whistling sound of the wind from the energy had strangely stilled. The atmosphere of the scene had also completely stilled. Everyone lifted their heads, only to see that a black ice block had appeared at the edge of the 3rd level. It was an ice block that was filled with black energy. The ice block was only the size of a person. It was already the 12th lunar month of winter, and snow began to fall around the ice block. It was as if the ice block was in a completely different environment from the surroundings. Ah, it's another instant kill. You lose. 10 gold coins, thank you. Nightmare stretched out her hand to Yuan Shi. Yuan Shi shook his head helplessly. He waved his hand and threw out 10 gold coins. He couldn't help but lament. Sigh, little star always kills in an instant every time she makes a move. There's no creativity at all. The 2 of them weren't conversing in their souls. They were speaking directly in this deathly silent space, causing everyone to shudder and quickly come back to their senses. The 2 people sitting in front of Lu Bai also quickly stood up. The valiant man straightened his body, and a low voice came from the 3rd floor. Friend, you're going a little overboard, what's wrong with that? I'm talking to him in a very serious manner. Speak with strength, speak with reason. Isn't that what he said? Yun Nuoxing said indifferently. She stood up and poured tea for herself and everyone else. After a while, she felt that the energy density in the surroundings was increasing. She sighed deeply and raised her head against the sunlight coming from the pavilion. She looked at the valiant man and felt that his energy was circulating. She said softly, "I advise you to give up too." The valiant man had just started circulating his energy. When he heard this, he frowned. He lowered his head and looked at Yun Nuoshing, who had an unbelievably beautiful face. He wasn't affected at all. "I've already stopped twice and spared their lives. You should be thanking me. They've already worn away the little bit of patience I have, if only I had any." Yun Nuoshing crossed her hands in front of her. Her colorful eyelashes trembled slightly. She raised her head and looked at him. What she said made the people around her dumbfounded. Yun Nuoshing looked around and said indifferently, "For the third time, I won't hold back. I won't care if there are other people here. No one here can take a blow from me and still sit safe and sound, including a certain senior here. This is a warning. As for who I'm targeting, it's up to you. Originally, I was just quietly hiding here, waiting for the opening of the Yin-Yang world. I didn't intend to communicate with you. It was you who came to me." After these words, everyone's expression changed slightly. Many people frowned slightly. This guy was too arrogant. On the contrary, they felt that this guy shouldn't have much energy left after killing 2 Son of God experts. Speaking of which, in terms of etiquette alone, compared to the Emperor of War and Emperor Might of this generation, you guys are really bad. Yun Nuoshing said something that was unclear. Then she sat down calmly and resumed her boring posture of holding her cheek with her left hand. She then added in her heart, "Well, I don't have much etiquette either." Yuan Shi and the others didn't think much of this sentence, but the others narrowed their eyes slightly when they heard it. They looked at Yun Nuoshing and the others with some hesitation. Did this guy know the 2 people on the Supreme List? Even if he didn't know them, he should have at least seen them and communicated with them. Otherwise, why would he talk about etiquette? The valiant man looked at Yun Nuoshing with a frown. The energy in his body calmed down at this moment. He turned his eyes and looked at the yellow-dressed woman beside him. The latter shook her head slightly at him. Only then did he let out a sigh of relief. He walked to the black ice block and was about to say something to Yun Nuoshing. Yun Nuoshing snapped her fingers again, and the ice block disappeared in an instant. Even the falling snowflakes disappeared completely, as if they had never existed in the first place. Lu Bai fell out of the black ice with his eyes closed. His skin was pale from the cold, and he was almost frozen into ice. However, the valiant man caught him and tested a few spots on his body. He was slightly relieved when he found that Lu Bai was still alive but in a deep coma. If Lu Bai had died here, it would have been troublesome. Seeing the valiant man sit back down without saying a word, as if he had swallowed his words, Xian and the others breathed a sigh of relief. They were afraid that if the valiant man said anything more, Yun Nuoshing would tear down this place in a fit of anger. Xian patted Yun Nuoshing reproachfully and said, Why do you always pose in such a scary way?" Yun Nuoshing stuck out her tongue and muttered, "All the people gathered here are young people. We are already attracting a lot of attention. This crazy girl has some old grudges with others. If we don't handle it well, we might get 1 or 2 people involved. It's better to be fierce. Look, it's not so annoying now. I don't like this kind of atmosphere." Ming nodded and said, "My brother is very fierce. It's just that this place is a little quiet." Yun Nuoshing was speechless. This was just a side effect. It was not a big problem. Then, he felt a strange gaze and he couldn't help but raise his head. He saw that on the top floor, there was an old man looking at him thoughtfully, which made him a little speechless. The old man was the senior that he had accidentally mentioned. At this moment, this high-level god was looking at him curiously. When he saw that he was looking at him, he nodded slightly. Yun Nuoshing also nodded and gave him an apologetic look. Then she lowered her head and saw that everyone was looking at her. She spread out her hands and said, "The senior who was unjustly implicated." Everyone responded with an "oh" and turned their gazes away. What do you think of the younger generation of the Kuan Yuan region? Most of the young experts are gathered here. Well, I guess you won't see anyone on the supreme list, Chu Yingzhan said with a smile. Yuan Shi and the others looked around thoughtfully and found it difficult to ask. However, Yu tugged at her sleeve with a strange look and said, "Sister Chu, it's not convenient to answer this question in front of Brother Yun." Chu Yingzhan's cheeks twitched. She smiled bitterly and said, "That's true. With this pervert sitting here, how could he take a fancy to the younger generation?" Everyone laughed dryly. "It's good that you understand." After a while, the atmosphere in the pavilion returned to normal. This time, more people were looking at Yun Nuoxing and the others, but many of them were doubtful and suspicious. Obviously, Yun Nuoxing's words just now had made many people suspicious. However, after seeing that the valiant man had swallowed his anger, everyone stopped thinking about it and looked away, lest they be frozen into popsicles in the next second. Lu Bai had not woken up yet. It would be bad if he was frozen and missed the opening of the Yin-Yang world. As for those gazes, Yun Nuoxing could ignore most of them. If no one came to talk to him, he would be happy to be free. As for the battle just now, there were still many people whispering to each other. To him, not even a single thread of energy was consumed. "Hey, idiot, let me ask you a question," Chu Yingzhan touched his arm and said in his soul. "After you become a demigod, what level of enemy can you kill with all your strength?" As soon as this question came out, Xian and the others also pricked up their ears. They also wanted to know the answer to this question. Yun Nuoxing was stunned. Obviously, he did not expect her to ask such a strange question. After a moment, he showed a thoughtful expression. He calculated silently in his heart for a while, and then said, "Not counting the artifact, if I go all out, I can probably kill a strong emperor of the netherworld. High-level gods are still very powerful for me now." Everyone was speechless. He said he could kill them in the beginning, and said they were still very powerful in the end. Why did it sound so harsh? Do you have any idea how many major realms you've crossed? If I count the divine weapon, it won't be a problem to kill early and middle god emperors easily. As for late god emperors, maybe it won't be a problem either. But for god emperors who have entered the 1,000-layered 100 revolutions, it will take a lot of effort, just a bit of effort. But to kill a god, even one who has just entered the first realm, there is a prerequisite. He has to stand there and wait for me to attack and then defend. Maybe I can kill him, Yun Nuoxing said as he twirled his fingers. When everyone heard this, they were not too surprised. Before he had advanced to the demigod level, he had already killed a quasi-god level master. Now, he had advanced from the second seal of the demigod level to the peak of the demigod level. His combat power was even more exaggerated. However, knowing that he could not deal with a quasi-god level master, they could not help but sigh. How powerful was the gap between the emperor god level and the quasi-god level? Huh? Unable to do anything? After hearing everyone's question, Yun Nuoxing was also stunned. He then hurriedly waved his hands. "How can I be helpless? After all, I was once a heavenly god. Even if I'm only a weak demigod now, I still have some methods to deal with late god rank experts. Well, it's not very safe. It's more like playing with my life. I have at least 3 methods to deal with that situation, if that situation really happens," Yun Nuoxing said as he stretched out 3 fingers, then spread his hands. "It's very dangerous. If there are no accidents, he probably won't use his full strength," Xian said softly. Yun Nuoxing nodded. Now in the world of the gods, there should be very few situations that would make him use his full strength. But it was hard to say. He kept bumping into the forbidden areas all day long. It was hard to guarantee that he would not encounter a situation that would require him to use his full strength. A soft sound of a bell and drum quietly spread throughout the pavilion. As the sound rang out, many people stopped talking and looked around thoughtfully. Then, a look of joy flashed across their faces. It was finally time. Their eyes impatiently turned to the top floor of the pavilion. There, an old figure with white hair and a beard that reached his waist slowly walked out. However, the old man's back was very straight. He was dressed in a white robe and had a rather sage-like aura. As he appeared, the gazes of countless people turned slightly hot. "Haha, it seems that a rather impressive little fellow has come to my water cloud pavilion." The old figure looked at the young figures in the pavilion and smiled slightly. His gaze lingered on Yun Nuoshing and the others, who appeared particularly indifferent. Then, he said, "My name is Qingbu, the pavilion master of the Water Cloud Pavilion. I'm in charge of sending out information about the Yin-Yang world this time." The young experts in the pavilion stood up and cupped their hands. The Water Cloud Pavilion had a certain reputation in the northeast region of the Kuan-Yuan region. A large part of the reason was that they were close to the Yin-Yang world. Their pavilion master was an emperor of the underworld expert. Just in the northeast region of the Kuan-Yuan region, they were a first-class force. There were not many forces comparable to them in this region. However, if they were placed on the stage of the world of the gods, they could barely be regarded as a second-class force. Many people were taken aback by Qingbu's words. They looked down at Yun Nua planet and saw Qingbu nodding at him in a friendly manner. Many people's expressions hardened. Who was this fellow? Even the pavilion master of the Water Cloud Pavilion was so polite to him. "Did you recognize him?" Xian and the others asked in their souls. "Well, as a high-level god, as long as he's not the kind who doesn't pay attention to the outside world and only wants to cultivate in seclusion every day, it's not surprising that he can recognize me." Yun Nuoshing shrugged. "Senior Qingbu, when can we enter the Yin-Yang world this time? We only received the news that it's about to open. Please give us some guidance." The valiant man cupped his hands and bowed respectfully. The intelligence of the Yin-Yang world was jointly handled by several forces in the Water Cloud City. Every year they would take turns. When the Yin-Yang world was about to open, they would be the first to send experts who could withstand the power of the Yin-Yang world at its peak to conduct an investigation inside. This year, it was the Water Cloud Pavilion's turn to be fully responsible for this matter. The forces in charge of the intelligence of the Yin-Yang world occupied a certain amount of opportunities and advantages. As for these matters, everyone had a tacit understanding. Qingbu stroked his white beard and nodded. With a wave of his hand, a map condensed by divine vitality was projected in the air of the pavilion. No matter which angle one looked at it, it was the same. On the map, a very well-shaped circle appeared. A brown mountain range cut the circle in half like a snake. Although it was not a perfect arc, it could be seen that it was a Tai Chi diagram. On the map, every place had a super high energy reaction. The snake-shaped arc and the other two eyes had an even stronger reaction. It was so bright that it seemed to be burning. In the Yin-Yang world this time, the ebb tide will start from these 2 points in the middle. The 2 types of energy will retreat to the 2 sides. The upper and lower ends and the middle of the Yin-Yang mountain range will be the place where the energy will converge. Like a wind cave, the energy from all directions will converge there. The 2 completely opposite energies will constantly stimulate each other. If swept in, even an Emperor God expert will gradually be exhausted to death. Qingbu looked at the map condensed by divine vitality and said, "The ebb tide will last for a day. After the energy tide retracts, it will last for about half a month. In the Yin-Yang world, there are hidden dangers that will obstruct you in various ways. We don't know the specifics. Even in the Yin-Yang world, the places near the ground are in a sealed state. The experts of the Water Cloud Pavilion look down from the sky and don't know what's below. Everything will have to wait until the official opening." The map condensed by divine vitality gradually changed under Qingbu's control. The energy that covered the entire circular map began to shrink from the center of the circle to the upper and lower ends. After shrinking to a certain range, it solidified. The edges of the two ends still had a high energy reaction, but it gradually weakened toward the center. Is there less than half of the safe zone in the yin-yang world this year? Looking at the map, everyone's expression was a little ugly. On the map, the high energy reaction covered almost half of the map. This time, the energy retraction didn't seem to be strong. Although this wasn't worth recording for Yun Nuoxing, he had sat here for half a day. He might as well record it down as he was bored. Anyway, he could come and go freely in the yin-yang world. If it wasn't for the fact that he could use it to temper his body, he would have rushed in long ago when the safe period arrived. After looking at it for a while, Yun Nuoxing felt that it was nothing. He got up and waved to everyone. Let's go. It's time to move. Chapter 942. The water cloud pavilion behind them was still a little noisy. Yun Nuoxing and the others had already retreated from the water cloud pavilion. When they left, they attracted some attention. Apart from Witch Chu, who many people knew was from the Kuan-Yuan region, the rest of the people in this group were all very mysterious and unfamiliar. Especially the demigod level, who was covered in colorful clothes. His strength seemed to be only at the demigod level, but he had casually killed 2 elementary god levels and even dared to warn everyone in the pavilion. Even the pavilion master of the water cloud pavilion treated him with respect. Who was that person? Just this alone was enough to make everyone extremely vigilant. After the group left the water cloud pavilion, they flew towards the yin-yang mountain range at full speed. With Yun Nuoxing around, even in the eyes of beginner gods, the extreme flash of the light element was just a flash of light. If they didn't pay full attention, they wouldn't be able to see anyone passing by. At most, they would only feel that their eyes were blurred. In the yin-yang mountain range, 2 kinds of energy rolled and collided in this huge mountain range, making rolling thunder. At this time, it was not time for the yin-yang world to open, so there were very few people around. There were only a few people, and their auras were not as strong as those of the younger generation in the water cloud pavilion. It seems that the yin-yang world has attracted a lot of people. Seeing people stop outside the mountain range, Yuanxi looked around for a while and said, "Have you figured out the situation of the yin-yang world?" Xian looked at Yun Nuoxing and asked softly. Yun Nuoxing nodded, looking at the place where the energy thunder kept rolling, and said, "Well, on the surface, it should be similar to what you know. The energy on the ground is completely divided. The left side is yin and the right side is yang." Looking around and feeling that the direction was not right, Yun Nuoxing waved her hand and controlled the Netherworld Ruin Sword to circle around the yin-yang mountain range. The evil spirit eye also emitted a bright light, staring at the mountain range where the terrifying energy was rolling. After a certain moment, she stopped the Netherworld Ruin Sword, then pointed forward and said, "This dividing line divides the yin-yang mountain range into 2 halves from top to bottom. The left side is yin and the right side is yang, which can also be said to be Taiying and Taiyang. The 2 eyes on this line are Shaoyang and Shaoyin. Well, this is what we know on the surface. Is there a specific difference?" Chu Yingzhan asked anxiously after hearing some clues. "Well, I can't tell you the details." Yun Nuoxing put her hands in her pockets. She thought for a while and said, "Originally, in the Shaoyin area, there was less yin and more yang. Conversely, in the Shaoyin area, there was less yang and more yin. In this place, in the Shaoyin area, there was no yin at all. It was all exuberant yang. It was the same for the Shaoyin area. When things reach an extreme, they will move in the opposite direction," Qin Yan said indifferently. "Well, I don't know either. I don't know much about Tai Chi in the ancient era, it was not popular. It seems that there was only some weak research in the ancient era. The yin-yang mountain range is indeed in the shape of Tai Chi," Yun Nuoxing said. Suddenly, she seemed to think of something and frowned, saying, It seems that there were many people who studied it during the mythological era. Well, in the end, there was nothing left from that lost era. In the ancient era, it was very difficult to excavate the remains of the mythological era. There was not much left in the study of Tai Chi. It is even harder to study it in this era. Speaking of which, Taiyuan territory and Jiyuan territory, aren't they Taiji? Kuan Yuan territory and Gan Yuan territory combined, aren't they Qian Kuan? Yuan Shi seemed to have discovered something and suddenly looked at Yun Nua planet. It's useless. The number of people who have discovered this is too many to count. During the ancient era, a group of heavenly gods had nothing better to do and studied the god realm from top to bottom, from inside to outside, but I couldn't find anything special about the god realm. It's just a name, so don't worry too much about it. Besides, the shape doesn't look like it either. Yun Nuoxing waved his hand casually. Yuan Shi thought for a while and said, "That seems to be true." Yun Nuoxing paused for a moment. She stretched out a finger and sighed, saying, "In the ancient era, the heavenly veins are poor for 3 generations. Tai Chi destroys a lifetime. Is this why there are not many heavenly veins masters and no one studies Tai Chi?" Everyone was speechless. Well, as far as I know, heavenly veins masters are quite rich. However, I have seen many poor heavenly veins masters. They often engage in underground projects and have to buy all kinds of strange things. In fact, they spend a lot of money. Yun Nuoxing shrugged. Underground projects? Digging graves? Yuan Shi's cheeks twitched. Dragon veins, and things related to mysterious crystals. Yun Nuoxing rolled her eyes. The so-called underground projects referred to the heavenly veins masters drilling in and out of the ground. They often came out of the ground with dirty faces. This major profession gave birth to many minor professions, but they could only learn a little of the heavenly veins masters' skills. A few years ago in Divine Sky City, Yun Nuoxing and the others had seen a lot of heavenly veins masters. Isn't it said that heavenly veins masters can shift the position of the stars? Chu Yingzhan said. Then they have to be heavenly veins masters in great success, or at least at the level of Emperor God. Yun Nuoxing rolled her eyes. There were 2 branches of heavenly veins masters: celestial masters and heavenly veins masters. There was no specific classification. The level of these 2 professions was basically based on the level of cultivation. To be specific, there were several dividing lines. However, no one in this group was a heavenly veins master, so no one could tell the difference. Even Yun Nuoxing did not know. He did not have much information about heavenly veins masters in his head. He had not studied them before, nor had he studied them now, even though he had a little inheritance of heavenly veins masters. However, these were not related to where they were now, so they did not pay much attention to it. After chatting for a while, they changed the topic. It's about 2 hours before the tide ebbs. The space of the Pillar of Creation is in the middle of the mountain range, which is also the center of the yin-yang world. It's an absolutely safe space. Let's go there first. Yun Nuoxing pointed in the direction of the center and said. Yuan Shi spread out his hands. You have the final say. Yun Nuoxing smiled and nodded. With a wave of his hand, energy barriers suddenly appeared on the netherworld sword, enveloping the group. Yun Nuoxing slowly spread his 6 wings, and the 9th Heaven Spirit Concealment Array also appeared on the netherworld sword at his will. He switched to the defensive mode on the outermost layer. It seemed that the yin-yang world also gave him a lot of pressure. He had already activated such a heavy defense before entering. However, after those defenses appeared, everyone felt a lot more at ease. Unless they were bombarded by a divine emperor with all their strength, there should not be any loopholes in the defense. The netherworld sword swayed and led everyone into the surging energy field. They broke in along the side of the moon and did not choose the mountain range in the center. That was where the 2 types of energy completely repulsed and fused. The energy was very violent. Even though Yun Nuoxing had several layers of powerful energy barriers, He did not want to waste too much energy to resist. If he entered from one side, the pressure would be reduced a lot. Moreover, Yun Nuoshing observed with his evil spirit eye that in the energy field, the higher they went, the more chaotic the energy was. On the contrary, at the bottom, the energy tended to be calm. Rumble, when the netherworld sword carried everyone into the yin-yang sky, the outer layers of the barriers suddenly became bright. The color in their line of sight faded slightly, and all they could see was a mist. The bright barriers lit up the surroundings like bright lamp. The temperature suddenly dropped a level. This is the yin side, right? Is this the yin energy? I've never sensed this kind of energy before. It's so strange. Yuan-Shi released a weak soul force between the layers of barriers. He did not dare to rush out at once. The high-energy reaction outside made his nerves sound an alarm. The moment he rushed out, it would probably backfire on him. What a strange energy! Xian and the others also sensed it and exclaimed. It's cold and very soft. My body is responding to it and asking me to jump over. I've never had such a reaction before. It seems to be very eager for the energy there. Yu shook Yun Nuoshing's arm and said with an inexplicable excitement. The yin energy is suitable for women to refine their bodies, while the yang energy is suitable for men to refine their bodies. Well, this is a normal situation. Yun Nuoshing lay on the netherworld sword and kept looking down. He said, the yin and yang energy is not an ordinary energy used to refine your bodies. You can experience its beauty later, but not now. The energy outside is too violent. You can't bear it if you go out directly. I can't bear it either. Suddenly, Yun Nuoshing's eyes fixed on a place. He waved his hand to stop the netherworld sword. Seeing him like this, the others also came up and followed his line of sight. What's wrong? What did you see? There's life inside. It seems to be the original life of this place, a life born from the yin energy. Yun Nuoshing raised his head and said, There's life in this damn place? The others were shocked. The first condition for a place to give birth to life was to be calm. In this place, there were high-energy reactions as far as the eye could see. What filled one's vision was either rolling energy or exploding energy lightning. How could there be life in such a place? The energy reaction at the bottom tends to be calm. There's a layer of barrier. Oh, I get it. That barrier is keeping the violent energy outside. The energy inside is very calm. This area is pure yin energy. If you look higher, in the thick clouds above the yin-yang sky, there are two types of energy mixed together. The falling energy snowflakes and ice crystals are also mixed with the two types of energy. Only inside the barrier is a single type of energy that is absolutely pure and calm. Yun Nuoshing slowly stood up and looked around. This area is not small. It will probably be exposed when the tide recedes. What kind of life forms are they? Xian looked down but couldn't see anything. He could only ask. Ordinary life forms, mutated demon beasts, and so on. Anyway, there's no one here. Moreover, you've seen the most miraculous life forms in this world. Do you feel that it's unbelievable that there's life forms here? Yun Nuoshing smiled. The most miraculous life forms? Everyone was stunned and dumbfounded. Zero Jikoin. The two of them, one is a life form of time, the other is a life form of the void. They represent the sea of time and the endless void, Yun Nuoshing said calmly. Don't tell me you forgot. I didn't forget. It's just that it doesn't feel real. It's too miraculous. It doesn't feel real in front of us. Yuan-Shi scratched his head and laughed dryly. The position is too high. It brings a clear sense of distance, Ming said. Yun Nuoshing had a strange expression. Then, he pointed at himself. Everyone was stunned and waved their hands speechlessly. You're a weirdo. That's another matter. In the yin-yang world, the thick energy fog blocked most of the vision and senses. Here, the senses of ordinary people couldn't even extend for 1,000 meters. Yun Nuoshing's was more or less blocked, But it wasn't limited to 1,000 meters. His soul power merged with the void and sensed in this space through that pure place. It extended very far. Moreover, the yin-yang world seemed very monotonous. Perhaps important things, such as life forms, were hidden behind that layer of safety barrier. They were flying in the air, so they couldn't see anything. In the lunar region, they followed the clearly visible mountain range 1,000 meters to the right. The energy there was so vigorous that it was almost like rows of volcanoes connected together, erupting non-stop all day long. Everyone could feel the powerful energy there without Yun Nuoxing's reminder. Can we really enter that place? Chu Yingzhen's face twitched. The court hadn't ended yet, and there was already such a powerful energy reaction there. When the tide receded, most of the energy in the yin-yang world would shrink back to the nest. Wouldn't that place be even more violent? If I could enter a few years ago, I won't have a problem with the current me. Yun Nuoxing pursed his lips. The super defense built by his pile of divine artifacts wasn't to be trifled with, but it was only defense. It was useless to rush in. If they couldn't come into contact with the energy, they could only watch helplessly if they ran to such a dangerous place. The hiding place of the Pillar of Creation would always be a place that others couldn't see, but if someone had the key, it would be quite easy to enter. For example, now, everyone only saw Yun Nuoxing controlling the netherworld ruin soared to fly toward the mountain range. Then, at a certain moment, a blue sky and white clouds suddenly appeared in their line of sight. There was also a huge black metal pillar whose top could never be seen, like a starry sky beacon. Wow, there's such an abyss of suffering outside, but it's still so peaceful here. Yuanshi couldn't help but smack his lips when he accidentally entered this place of eternal tranquility. Just now, he felt that there were energy reactions in all directions, and now the world had quieted down. In the sky there was a corner of a huge matrix. It was as if it had foreseen their arrival. The matrix had been floating there all this time. The top of the matrix seemed to be connected to the Pillar of Creation. A huge energy ripple appeared on the matrix and spread into the distance. The Pillar of Creation was also covered with golden runes. Has it been fixed? Seeing that it seemed to have been fixed, everyone was stunned. Could it be that someone had arrived here before them and fixed it while they were at it? Ahaha, that's impossible. This is probably a preparatory state. Previously, 2 of the pillars of creation were adjusted, and the rest are probably linked. This is good too. When we find them one by one, we won't have to check every single one. Yun Nuoxing chuckled. Everyone let out a long "oh," then sat down in a row on the grass. It was as if they were still in the same position and angle. They raised their heads and watched Yun Nuoxing rush toward the Pillar of Creation, releasing a strange energy, and fiddling with something that they couldn't understand. After a while, everyone saw a brilliant golden light flash from the Pillar of Creation and disappear in a flash. The golden runes also lit up for a moment, then went silent. The magic formation in the sky was the same. Then, everyone saw Yun Nuoxing, who was brimming with light elements, emerge from the space beside them. It's done. Yuanshi looked up and rolled his eyes. It's only been an hour. It's faster than before. The repair will be faster and faster. The linked reaction of the Pillar of Creation is moving spontaneously. I've just repaired the light element seal on this Pillar of Creation, and the seal has aged. The light element in this world has begun to weaken. After the dark element has been erased from the rules, will the light element also disappear with the world? Yun Nuoxing sighed. Everyone was silent. This was the rules of the world, and it was the choice of the world. There was no other way. Chu Yingzhen immediately reacted. She saw everyone's inexplicably sorrowful expressions, and in the blink of an eye, she saw Yun Nuoxing smirking there. Her beautiful eyes blinked, and she suddenly thought of something. That's not right. 1,000 years later, the rules have changed, eh? Everyone was stunned. After the rules were reversed, it seemed that everything would come back to life, right? When they turned around and saw Yun Nuoshing looking at them with a mischievous smile, everyone understood. Then, they looked at each other, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. They were fooled by this girl again. Well, the dark element has completely become history. Even if the rules are reversed, it won't come back to life because it was erased by someone. But let's not talk about this now. Yun Nuoshing smiled and waved her hand. Looking left and right at Xian and the others, Yun Nuoshing put her hands on her hips and said, "Well, there are more girls in our group." "That's..." Chu Yingzhan muttered softly. "This is your big harem." Ouch! Ouch! Yun Nuoshing used a knife to wake the girl up from her daydreaming. Chu Yingzhan immediately exploded and rushed in front of Yun Nuoshing and shouted, "Why did you hit me?" With a slap, he pushed that beautiful face away from him. Yun Nuoshing rolled his eyes and said, "Who told you to let your imagination run wild all day? Little Star wants to split up and temper her body separately?" Xian blinked. She remembered that Yun Nuoshing said that yin energy was suitable for women, and yang energy was suitable for men. She immediately thought of this. Yun Nuoshing blinked and didn't immediately respond. He paced back and forth with his arms crossed, deep in thought. Occasionally, he would snap his fingers to indicate that he had thought of something, but then he would shake his head, as if he didn't think it was feasible. Everyone knew what he was thinking just by looking at his movements. Half an hour later, Yun Nuoshing didn't stop after snapping his fingers. Everyone looked up and saw her smile with a row of shiny teeth. "I have an idea." "Well, the initial idea was to split up, but it's not easy to do so, right? Even if I give the Netherworld Ruin Sword to one of you, you won't be able to use half of its power. Half of the power won't be able to withstand the violent energy outside," Yun Nuoshing said. "Shouldn't we wait until the tide recedes? Won't the energy be safer then?" Yuan Shi scratched his head and said, "You can take your girls over there. The two of us can handle it ourselves. The bottom level is indeed safer." Yun Nuoshing shook her head and smiled faintly. "But don't you think that the tempering effect will be better in a place with a high energy density?" Everyone stumbled and almost fell to the ground. They knew she was going to say that. Yuan Shi spread his hands. What was that saying again? All they had to do now was smile. Chapter 943. Emerging from the absolute peace of the Pillar of Creation, which was forever unaffected by the outside world, the energy barrier expanded again in an instant, isolating the still violent energy outside. Yun Nuoshing, who was holding up the barrier, had long hair that was originally dazzling in color. At this moment, everyone realized that when this guy was holding up the barrier, his hair seemed to be especially bright. "Me? I'm already refining and absorbing the energy outside." When everyone asked, Yun Nuoshing was stunned for a moment, then calmly replied. Everyone was stunned for a few seconds. "Ah!" Yun Nuoshing flung her long hair back with both hands, then reached out and pointed at the multiple layers of barriers that surrounded them. 5 layers of barriers, 1 layer of life-bound formation. While the 9 heavens spirit-concealing formation isolates the energy, it continuously transmits energy to me. No, didn't you say that the yin energy is suitable for women?" Yuan Shi's eyes widened. "This place was on the side of the moon, right? TSK, this pervert." Chu Yingzhan smacked her lips and distanced herself from her with a look of disdain. "Although I don't know what you're thinking, I think you must have thought of something very rude." Yun Nuoshing stared at her with a black face and waved her hand. "At the end of the day, the yin energy is just a type of energy, and it's more suitable for women. However, you didn't say that men can't use it, right? It's just a matter of utilization and compatibility. Some people who cultivate mystic techniques are inclined towards the yin attribute, so of course they're suitable for the yin energy. Also, why can't men who cultivate the water element use the energy here?" Everyone's cheeks twitched and they felt that they couldn't refute her. In terms of energy, Yun Nuoshing was an energy master because of her physique. Furthermore, she had her past memories, so that was even more exaggerated. In terms of knowledge of energy and other aspects, she was far ahead of them. You just said that there's a way to dilute the energy outside and directly use this violent energy? Yuanshi raised his head and looked at the thick clouds in the sky. Every flash of lightning made his heart tremble slightly. He thought of what Yun Nuoshing had said. Although he was looking forward to it and knew that this guy was omnipotent, he was still a little worried. Of course there's a way. After thinking about it for a long time, I still think that method is more appropriate. Just that it's a bit noisy. Yun Nuoshing nodded. She looked around and said, "There's still half a day before the tide recedes. This can be considered a small seclusion. Although I don't know how long I'll be in seclusion, I'll just pick a place with the densest energy. This way, I won't have to worry about the formation not being able to sustain itself." Brother, when the tide recedes, the energy of yin-yang heaven will recede toward the upper and lower ends. At that time, the energy concentration at the apex will reach its maximum, Ming said. Yun Nuoshing nodded. So there are only two places to choose from. One is at the end of the moon and the other is at the end of the sun. However, because it's at the apex, the two types of energy will converge there at the same time. The ice crystal particles produced from the fusion are actually a kind of pure energy crystal. If you just absorb those, the effect will not be small. But before I go into seclusion, I have to go to Shaoyin and Shaoyang to get the Taixien Yin essence and Tianxian Yang essence. At the same time, I'll condense your carriers into crystals here. Yun Nuoshing pondered for a moment. Then let's go to Shaoyin first. We'll go to Shaoyang later. Then, we'll go into seclusion at the apex of Taixien for a while, Yuanshi said and chuckled. After all, there are more girls in our team. Chu Yingzhan nodded. Yes, it's all his harem. It hurts. Touching the hand knife that caused sparks to fly, Yun Nuoshing looked suspiciously at Chu Yingzhan, who was jumping up and down with her head in her hands. Was this crazy girl's head made of metal? Why was it so hard? Because there weren't any big movements and they didn't use much energy, they didn't rest and flew directly to Shaoyin. When the energy tide receded, the energy density there would increase exponentially and become a terrifying hell. Even emperor gods wouldn't dare to casually step into that place. However, everyone thought that since the court hadn't ended yet, that place should perhaps not be that scary. However, when everyone arrived at the place where the eye was located, they realized that they had guessed wrongly. Sure enough, what they saw on paper and what they saw in reality were two completely different things. How was this, Shaoyin? In this place, the yin energy was so concentrated that it almost solidified out of thin air. Yun Nuoshing almost went blind when he used his evil spirit eye to look at it. That kind of huge amount made the illusory energy seem to have the concept of mass. The space seemed to be somewhat distorted by the pressure of this energy, slowly twisting towards the eye, like a huge whirlpool. Does this place lead to hell? Yuanshi's face twitched. There was actually a pool of water in this place. It was a huge pool of water with a diameter of 100 miles. Or rather, it was a huge lake that was light black in color. Looking down from the center, it was as black as an abyss. It was an energy pool that was completely condensed from yin energy. It was so concentrated that it was liquid. By the side of the lake, the energy would condense into thumb-sized transparent white crystals that would fall to the ground. The energy in this place was already overflowing. It was already at this stage before the tide receded. If the lake water were to boil, it would really look like hell at first glance. It's so cold. Little Moon shivered and rubbed her arms. After thinking for a while, she moved closer to Yun Nuoshing's embrace and rubbed against it twice. Only then did she feel a little warmer. Rubbing the little head that was rubbing against his chest, Yun Nuoshing let out a breath of air. That breath of air directly turned into a block of ice and froze in the air. The corners of everyone's eyes twitched when they saw this. This place was too exaggerated. Phew, if it weren't for the special rules of the realm of the gods, this temperature would be enough to freeze the space. Of course, I'm referring to the normal state of space. The space in the realm of the gods is not normal, so it won't be so easy to freeze it. As Yun Nuoshing spoke, he took out another divine artifact and added a barrier. Only then did everyone feel the temperature rise a little. Let's go down. Yun Nuoshing informed everyone. Everyone nodded. He took a deep breath and then controlled the Netherruin sword to turn around. A sharp sword aura bloomed, and wherever the tip of the sword pointed, the light black lake water seemed to part. The energy that was blown away by the sword aura crackled all around. Then, everyone saw thumb-sized transparent ice crystals continuously appear in the air and fall into the lake, creating circles of ripples. This cold Yin energy. Is this Yin energy really that powerful? Xian and Mei Mao looked serious. Could this kind of energy really be used to temper one's body and not to freeze one into an ice sculpture? Yun Nuoshing waved his hand, and 5 types of divine flames surged out of his body. They turned into 5 small rings of fire and enveloped the barrier. Everyone felt the temperature around them recover a little. It seemed that Yun Nuoshing also felt that this place was very scary. He was close to putting all his effort into the defense. After making the final layer of defense, Yun Nuoshing let out a light breath. With a wave of his hand, the Netherruin sword carried everyone into the lake. Chi, an ear-piercing sound rang in everyone's ears. In front of them, several types of extreme energy reacted. The energy surged and exploded, creating a bizarre scene. However, the darkness in front of them didn't change much. The extremely cold energy that seeped in through the layers of defense made everyone feel that the energy circulating in their bodies showed signs of stagnation. Everyone's expressions turned serious. They also circulated their energy to prevent themselves from being frozen into ice. It feels like this is the 9th level of the underworld. Qin Yen couldn't help but say as she circulated her energy to protect herself. The 9th level of the underworld is much calmer than this place, Yun Nuoshing also couldn't help but say. Ziyen observed her surroundings with some unease. She rubbed her somewhat numb jade-like hands. Suddenly, her beautiful eyes paused. Her voice was somewhat nervous as she said, "Little Xingxing, your hair has frozen." Yun Nuoshing paused. He turned around and swung his long hair. Indeed, he felt something heavy hanging behind his head. He didn't know when, but every strand of his hair had turned into strips of ice. He didn't even realize it. He activated the divine flames in his body slightly and melted the layers of ice. Fortunately, it was just ordinary ice. It didn't cause his energy to stagnate. Oh, the 9 heavens spirit concealment formation's feedback energy is too strong. It's frozen. Yun Nuoshing brushed his colorful hair. He felt that it was going to freeze again. He couldn't be bothered with it. The ice wouldn't disturb him. It's fine. Don't worry. The Nethervoid sword turned into a streak of golden light and quickly swept down to the bottom. The Nethervoid sword was violently resisting the other forces here. Ice constantly appeared on the outermost energy barrier and melted. Wherever the Nethervoid sword passed, it left behind a large hole. Large amounts of ice crystals immediately appeared in the hole. A few seconds later, the lake water swept over and sank the ice crystals into the water, disappearing without a trace. This lake was also ridiculously deep. Perhaps it would be more appropriate to call it a well. It was a well of unknown depth. As everyone went deeper, the Nethervoid sword became more and more vigorous. Yun Nuoshing had to use more divine artifacts to strengthen his defenses. It wasn't that the energy outside was strong enough for him to fully defend himself. The pervasive Nethervoid sword was the reason why Yun Nuoshing's expression was so grave. The Nethervoid sword could enter through several layers of barriers. In the end, he had no choice but to use a formation and several divine artifacts to create a barrier of laws to resist the extreme cold. It's so deep. Does this place really lead to the 9th level of the underworld? Yuan-shi looked at the pitch-black bottom of the lake, and couldn't help but frown. He looked around and saw that the others were also helping to defend, but most of the effort was done by Yun Nuoshing. He was certain that if they passed through the energy barrier, they would immediately be frozen into chunks of popsicles. They couldn't see anything in the pitch-black bottom of the lake. They could only see the energy barrier and the nether void sword cutting through the water and drifting backward. Everyone turned to look around. In a daze, they seemed to see a pale yellow river surging from the distance. It was unknown how wide the river was, but it was practically a sea. Everyone was shocked. In the long river, there were giants whose bodies were as big as mountains. They held broken weapons in their hands and staggered in the long river. Their roars almost shattered the void. In the long river, there was also a large group of strange-looking creatures. Even the humanoid creatures looked very strange. There were also figures that looked like gods and devils. They were struggling in the long river, and tears of blood flowed from their eyes. In the sky above the long river, the river of stars shattered. Incomparably huge stars exploded one after another, becoming brilliant fireworks in the starry sky. The stars dimmed, and tens of thousands of stars fell. They couldn't see the source of the river, but if they looked around, they could see the end. It was pitch black, as if it was an endless void. Perhaps it was really a black hole that had swallowed the river, the shattered stars, and the figures that looked like gods and devils. There wasn't even a trace of light. Everyone was shaken. They felt that they had seen something incredible. It wasn't something they could know. They should close their eyes, but the river had an inexplicable attraction that made them unable to close their eyes. Don't look. A gentle voice that contained a mysterious power woke them up from their inexplicable state. They abruptly regained their senses. The light yellow river was still in front of them, but they immediately reacted and shifted their gazes away. Cold sweat covered their faces. After a long time, Yuan-shi panted, his voice trembling. "What's that?" 30,000 creatures crossing the yellow spring. Yun Nuoshing said indifferently. The 3 here didn't mean the number 3. It meant a lot or countless. The 3,000 great worlds, the end of all the realms in the universe, the eternal reincarnation station. Yun Nuoshing lifted her head and looked at the slowly moving picture in her sight. Then, she closed her eyes and said indifferently, "I've been there many times. The 9th netherworld, or the underworld." Everyone's hearts trembled. Did such a place really exist? The underworld is the home of all living things. Reincarnation is the journey of all living things. Generation after generation of gods and devils, the endless journey. The river Styx saves all living things, obliterates the dead, and goes to the afterlife. They multiply and multiply endlessly in the cycle of reincarnation, returning or starting all over again. One day, all the realms in the universe will be overturned, and those who have passed away will be reborn on the broken bones. Yun Nuoshing murmured, and her words sent chills down everyone's spines. Finally, she snapped her fingers and smiled at everyone. Excerpts from the introduction of the quotations from the mythological era. Everyone fell on the netherworld ruins sword with a boom. Their foreheads couldn't be any darker. We have to speed up. This place seems to be connected to the underworld. If we're not careful, we might fall in. Yun Nuoshing looked at the towering river Styx and said to everyone. With a wave of her hand, the netherworld ruins sword sped down. It's almost time to reach the bottom. Although this place shouldn't be as close to the bottom of the god realm as the Eastern Sea, this lake should be connected to an extremely deep underground. In fact, at the bottom of the god realm, one will come into contact with a layer of laws. That layer is the bottom of the god realm. The space beyond that layer is impossible to explore. That layer of laws is so strong that even celestial gods can't do anything about it. Quarter Moon and the others also studied it back then. Yun Nuoshing stretched out her hand and condensed energy into a huge floating island. Then, she pointed at the bottom of the floating island and said, It's about a third of the bottom. The tip of the island is completely undetectable. There's no way to explore it from the inside out. It's also one of the greatest secrets of the god realm. Since ancient times, no one has been able to uncover it. The same goes for the Pillar of Creation. As Yun Nuoshing spoke, the netherworld ruins soared gradually slowed down. Their surroundings were still pitch black, but something had appeared in front of them. It was a rocky ground, uneven and filled with broken stones. There was also a layer of pale white ice covering the ground and the broken stones. The profound essence is here? Devil Nightmare shook its head left and right, but it was pitch black here, and it was difficult to see everything in one breath. The Netheruin sword carried them around the bottom, but what surprised everyone was that they did not see the great mysterious essence that Yun Nuo had mentioned. I see profound ice crystals. So they're produced in a place like this? Holding the fish that he had just scooped up, it was still emitting biting cold air, causing a thin layer of ice to appear on his palm. Yuanshi quickly put it down and waved her hand, circulating her divine essence, causing the layer of ice to gradually melt. It's the size of a human head. It's at least 100,000 kilograms. Nightmare looked left and right at the profound ice crystal. It was about the size of a human head and was still emitting cold energy. Bing Air stretched out her hand and shook it. A moment later, she quickly withdrew her hand and shook it. It's so cold. Yun Nuoshing, who was still searching for the profound essence, seemed to understand something. She couldn't help but smack her lips. Tisk, it's hiding. It's hiding. Everyone came back to their senses and remembered that they were looking for the profound essence. When they heard this, they were stunned. That thing could run away? Well, something like that. Knowing what everyone was puzzled about, Yun Nuoshing nodded. It's the condensed medium of the profound essence. It's almost like a fairy. Due to its uniqueness, although it doesn't have intelligence, it has some instincts to seek luck and avoid danger. It's like a reflex. This is troublesome. It's not good to stay in this place for too long. The low temperature caused by the cold energy is difficult to remove. Wait for another 30 days. Yun Nuoshing said. She suddenly saw the profound ice crystal from the corner of her eyes. She was stunned for a moment and stood up excitedly. Oh, it can be like this. Everyone was stunned when they saw her talking to herself. She suddenly became excited. Fishing. Yun Nuoshing chuckled. With a wave of his hand, the lunar platform that had been cast into the shape of an imprint platform appeared beside him. That even more terrifying cold energy caused everyone to tremble as they took a few steps back. Every time this thing appeared, the surrounding temperature would drop by several levels. Yun Nuoshing weighed the profound platform and nodded. Then, under everyone's stunned gaze, she threw it out of the barrier. Rumble, the profound platform's extremely heavy weight smashed into the bottom of the lake. The layer of white ice shattered with a crack. A shockwave could be clearly seen in the lake and spread in all directions at the bottom of the lake. The layer of white ice was completely destroyed. Even the sand and dust at the bottom of the lake were swept up, blurring the line of sight below. Fishing. Everyone's cheeks twitched when they thought of what he had just said. So when he said fishing, he meant smashing down with the profound platform? Which fish was so strong that it could maintain its fish form after being smashed by the profound platform. However, everyone knew that when he said fishing, he didn't really mean fishing. He wanted to fish out the profound essence. Although he said fishing, the method he used was smashing. The rumbling sound continued for several minutes at the bottom of the lake. Everyone waited patiently for 10 minutes. When all the sand and dust had settled to the bottom of the lake and was about to be sealed in ice again, a blue light shone out from the darkness. That light was the lunar platform. It had smashed into the bottom of the lake, creating a large crater. Perhaps due to the influence of the cold energy in the surroundings, the lunar platform released a dazzling halo of light. Everyone could sense that it was constantly absorbing the energy within, and then, Yun Nuoshing's body trembled. Her cheeks twitched. She said, "The profound Een platform is absorbing the energy here and feeding it back to me." Everyone was speechless when they heard this. Their faces were filled with envy and jealousy. Spiritual divine body? That's too much of a cheat. Yun Nuoshing waved her hand. That was not the main point. She turned and looked at the profound Een platform. At this moment it had already become a glowing stamp. On the stamp there was something that had not been seen before. It was a long, pale white rock. It was like a mini mountain that was placed horizontally. On the pale white mountain there were thumb-sized yellow crystals embedded. Even in the lake, they could see transparent air currents coming out of the holes in the rock and circling around it. I got it. It's the profound Een essence. Yun Nuoshing grinned. She waved her hand and made the profound Een platform fly back. She gently placed it on the Netherworld Ruins sword. Everyone gathered in front of the profound Een platform. Looking at the arm-sized rock, they could not help but ask, "This is the profound Een essence? It doesn't have that kind of Een energy. This aura is very gentle." Xian stretched out her hand curiously and waved it around the transparent air currents released by the profound Een essence. Her hand was slightly cold. She felt that she had touched cold air, but it was not as cold as the lake water outside the barrier. It was very soft like silk. "That's the profound Een chi." Yun Nuoshing smiled. As she spoke, she gently broke off a few thumb-sized yellow crystals from the profound Een essence. She said, "Merge the profound Een chi into your own divine energy. Just like how you use your willpower to change your own energy and aura, you just have to carefully change your divine energy." "What is that?" Chu Yingzhan looked at the yellow crystals she broke off and asked. "Een essence crystals. The essence of a fairy's item." Yun Nuoshing opened her hand and counted. There were a total of 6 crystals. The 6 crystals were displayed like high-quality gemstones. They were very beautiful. "What's the use of them?" Yu blinked her large eyes, looking expectant. "Yes. I think maybe we can do this." Yun Nuoshing thought for a moment and mumbled. Then, under everyone's puzzled gazes, she ran to the profound Een platform and sat down cross-legged. She took out a bunch of unknown things and asked the girls for the things they carried with them. As for the latter, except for Chu Yingzhan, who was shouting "pervert" as she took it out, everything else was normal. They watched in confusion as Yun Nuoshing extracted and condensed the Een chi outside, as if she was taking materials from the ground. Then, she used something to fiddle with the 6 Een essence crystals. Clanking sounds rang out. In short, 10 minutes later, Yun Nuoshing let out a sigh of relief. She waved to everyone to indicate that she was done. Then, everyone gathered over. "Jewelry!" Everyone was stunned when they saw what she had placed on the profound Een platform. She had divided the 6 Een essence crystals into 8 equal portions. 2 of them were slightly larger, but they weren't small. Then, she used the Een chi and Een energy outside to condense them into crystals and sealed the Een essence crystals inside. Finally, she either embedded them or hung them on a few items to make necklaces or bracelet. As for this thing, since it's a bit complicated and hard to explain, I'll use the simplest way to explain it. This thing can increase your cultivation speed and subtly increase your potential. It's quite effective even for gods, so that's how it works, Yun Nuoshing said as she hung the necklace on Xian's necklace and hurriedly put on the jewelry for Ming, Little Moon, and Little Purple Soul. What a simple sentence. Yuan Shi and Mo Yan's cheeks twitched upon hearing this. Just this sentence alone was enough to make this thing's value skyrocket, especially that last part. Chapter 944. In another place in the Yin-Yang world, as far as the eye could see, there was a red heat in the golden light, as if they were in magma. There was a thick liquid in all directions, and the high temperature could almost burn a hole in the space. It might be a little too light to say that they were in magma, but it felt more like they were deep in the sun. The temperature distorted space, and even time had to retreat. You can't bear the temperature of the sun. Hearing the nightmare's chatter, Yun Nuoxing couldn't help but roll her eyes. She pointed to the sky and said, "The central temperature of the two suns in our divine realm is enough to burn an emperor of the underworld powerhouse who majored in defense like barbecue meat on an iron plate." This slightly strange description made everyone's cheeks tremble. "Yuan," she said, "are you hungry?" Yun Nuoxing nodded seriously. "A little. Are you going out for barbecue? It's my treat." Okay. Everyone was angry. This isn't the time to talk about barbecue, right? Yun Nuoxing and Yuan Shi shrugged and stuck out their tongues. At this time, they were in the Shaoyang area, but the situation here was exactly the same as the Shaoyin area. In this place, they could see the extremely bright fire without using the evil spirit eye. The Shaoyin area was reserved and deep as a 10,000-year-old ice, but here it was more like a fiery red and passionate sun, and it was in the center, so all they could see was fiery red and gold. Yun Nuoxing even deliberately used a few layers of barriers to block the light that was almost blinding. Otherwise, they would probably be blinded as soon as they saw it. The pure Yin energy in the Shaoyin area made the girls feel as if they were bathing in spring rain. Yun Nuoxing wanted to say winter rain, but she didn't dare to say it. The yang energy here made the three young men's faces glow red, and the skin exposed outside their clothes was illuminated red, with a metallic luster. Oh, except for Yun Nuoxing, who wrapped himself impeccably and even wore gloves. "It's too hot," Yun Nuoxing said lightly. Everyone was speechless. After exchanging glances, they sighed helplessly and ignored the clown. Unlike the troublesome process of obtaining the extreme mysterious Yin essence, the heavenly mysterious Yang essence was quietly suspended at the bottom of the Yang lake, like a carefully polished jade sculpture. It was very beautiful, but its shape looked a bit like a tree, and it was not an ordinary kind of resemblance. What about the golden tree? It's very dazzling. The heavenly profound Yang essence that was fished up from the bottom of the lake was like a beautiful piece of art that had been sculpted into the shape of a tree. The golden roots of the tree were rooted in a golden rock, and under the dense foliage, there were fiery red fruits that looked like jade beads. It's so beautiful. How can nature give birth to such beautiful works of art? Little moon, little purple soul, Yuer and Mei Mao's eyes shone brightly as they moved closer to look at it. Little purple soul even carefully reached out her small hand to touch the golden leaves, causing the leaves to rustle. "This thing has been touched." Yun Nuoxing's face darkened. "What do you mean it was naturally born? It was clearly sculpted by someone." Everyone was shocked. Yun Nuoxing was speechless. She grabbed it from a distance and turned it around to look at it, but she couldn't find any signature or traces left behind. Moreover, the heavenly mysterious Yang essence wasn't damaged other than being sculpted by someone as a work of art. Its energy was still round and full, but its shape, I don't know which idiot sculpted it, but other than its appearance there's no damage. After looking at it for a long time, she still couldn't find anything left behind. Yun Nuoxing frowned, and a colorful light appeared between her fingers. She swept it across the extremely obvious sculpted area, but after a moment she shook her head. "I can't sense it. Either many years have passed, or the person who sculpted it was a god." "Well, I think it's more likely to be the latter." Waving her hand, she made it float in the air, and carefully picked the red fruit. Yun Nuoxing said indifferently, "Perhaps it was originally much bigger than this. That old urchin, yes, old urchin, got playful, and then it became like this. Of course, he took a large part of it with him. Perhaps he didn't need so much, so he left behind this work of art for someone who came after him." Towards the end, Yun Nuoxing couldn't help but feel her cheeks twitch. She couldn't continue. Who in the world was so bored as to turn the profound heavenly Yang essence into this? She asked for Yuan Shi and Nightmare's personal belongings and inlaid them on the rings like she had just done. Yun Nuoshing clapped her hands and put away the remaining yang essence crystals and profound heavenly yang essence. After putting on the ring inlaid with the yang essence crystals, Yuan Shi shivered all over. It was as if a warm current was flowing through his body, and an indescribable sense of comfort made him suck in a breath of cold air. He rolled his eyes and a wretched expression appeared on his face, leaving everyone speechless. Feeling everyone's strange gazes on him, Yuan Shi quickly waved his hand and said, "Then, where are we going to temper ourselves now?" "This." Yun Nuoshing packed up her things and lifted her foot to lightly stomp on the ground. A teleportation array wrapped around them, and they disappeared in a flash. When they reappeared, they were already floating above Yang Lake. "Well, normally speaking, you won't be able to use the energy here," Yun Nuoshing said after using the teleportation array to leave the bottom of the lake. Everyone was stunned for a moment, and after thinking for a while, they understood. They shook the crystals they were carrying and said, "Is it this?" The Yin essence crystals and the Yang essence crystals contain endless Yin and Yang energy. Yun Nuoshing tossed a Yang essence crystal and poured energy into it. After his star force entered the crystal, it came out from the other side a moment later. The energy had already turned into star force that was filled with Yang energy. The energy inside is inexhaustible, and it can also allow you to cultivate Yin and Yang energy. The speed won't be any slower than tempering here. Wait a minute. After speaking, before anyone could respond, Yun Nuoshing raised her hand again. She tilted her head and thought for a moment, then said, "Speaking of which, you still have to condense the carrier into a crystal, right?" I would have forgotten if you didn't mention it." Yuan Shi suddenly realized and slapped his forehead. Everyone. They stopped at the top of the yin-yang sky. This position was at a dividing point. One side was filled with yin energy, and the other side was filled with yang energy. High in the sky, the two types of energy constantly contacted and reacted, and a layer of pale energy crystals fell like snowflakes. If it weren't for the gray mist in sight, the scenery here would be quite beautiful. The cycle of the 4 seasons, the cycle of 1,000 cycles, a soft and gentle recitation, as if singing a hymn. The language of the mythological era made the world quietly change. The collision of energy in the sky stopped abruptly, and an incomparably mysterious array appeared on the ground. Endless divine patterns spread out from Yun Nuoshing's body and took root in the space, condensing into a golden divine pattern tree about 10 feet in size. In the center of the divine pattern tree, a colorful divine pattern was condensed, like a budding flower. Divine body of acceptance, binding release. These few words, coupled with what happened in front of them, made everyone break out in a cold sweat. The last time they saw this scene, that guy was already risking his life. Now, he released the binding. What was he planning to do? There was nothing for him to risk his life here, right? Yun Nuoshing, who was curled up in the divine pattern tree, slowly opened her eyes and put her hands together to form a seal. Then, the golden divine pattern tree suddenly cracked open, and she came out through the crack. She flipped in the air and floated to the ground. Gather. After landing on the ground, Yun Nuoshing turned to face the divine pattern tree. Her hands changed seals, and with a soft shout, the divine pattern tree emitted an incomparably bright light. The energy of the world, the energy of the entire yin-yang sky, was suddenly attracted and surged over like waves. The energy in the area covered by the array soared by several levels in the blink of an eye. The energy, whether violent or calm, calmed down the moment it surged into the divine pattern tree. The pure energy flowed through the branches and leaves to the trunk, and then spread out from the roots of the divine pattern tree. The new energy still maintained its original characteristic. Before entering, it was in a fused state. When it came out, it was in a fused state. Even if it was in a semi-fused state, it was still in a fused state. The divine pattern tree filtered out all the unstable elements of the energy that came in contact with it, turning it into pure energy that spread out, allowing everyone to absorb stably. After setting up a few more arrays to make the space indestructible, Yun Nuoxing clapped his hands and smiled at everyone. It's done. Xian reacted the fastest. She went to Yun Nuoxing and grabbed him to look at him. Your divine pattern, it's all there, including the core. Yun Nuoxing smiled and pointed at the divine pattern tree. The divine pattern is a clone of the Na Ling godly body, it's also a symbol. If you remove the restraints of the Na Ling godly body, you can let the divine pattern come out and connect with another Na Ling godly body for a short time. That way, you can obtain most of the power of the Na Ling godly body, including the divine weapons. Now, you can treat it as an energy transfer station. The dragon core, the ultimate mysterious Yin essence, and the heavenly mysterious Yang essence are all yours. Together with the energy here, you won't fail to condense the divine pattern, Yun Nuoxing said with a smile. Xian frowned. Mei Mao looked at the golden divine pattern tree that was 30 meters tall, and then at the colorful flower that was about to bloom. She opened her mouth but didn't say anything. She recognized the flower. It was the pattern that had taken root on Yun Nuoxing's chest. Feeling her worried gaze, Yun Nuoxing smiled and reached out to ruffle her long purple hair. Don't worry, it'll be fine. This is a basic operation. Releasing the divine pattern tree won't burden me. It will automatically absorb the power of heaven and earth to maintain its existence. At most, I'll lose some of the characteristics of the divine pattern body, such as energy. I can still use the divine weapons, and I don't know how to fight now. No one will be bored enough to come to this place. Even if they feel that there's something wrong with the energy, they won't be able to break the sevenfold array here. Yun Nuoxing explained the steps again. Because it was his first time trying this method, he wasn't 100% sure that it would work. There wouldn't be a problem if he just treated it as energy, but if he had to tamper with his own energy carrier, if he wasn't careful. Don't worry, we're not idiots. If we can't even handle this, how can we catch up to you? Yuan Shi said as he patted Yun Nuoxing's shoulder. Well, even if you guys break it, I can still fix it for you. Yun Nuoxing shrugged. Don't say such scary things. Everyone muttered. The 9 of them sat under the divine pattern tree, surrounded by strands of divine pattern. They entered a deep state of cultivation, and the energy in the area began to surge. Yun Nuoxing looked at his excessively white palms and was a little dazed. He almost didn't know what his original palm looked like. It was covered in divine pattern tree, and although it was beautiful, it was a little dazzling. Now that he saw his original palm, he couldn't help but sigh. The place quieted down immediately. Everyone was in a deep state of cultivation, trying to modify their energy carriers. He was the only one who was still standing there. The divine pattern tree attracted the energy in the area to gather here. He could also receive some of the energy from the divine pattern tree, so he didn't have to sit down and cultivate. Apart from him, little purple soul was walking around in circles, occasionally squatting down to pick up something from the ground. She was having a lot of fun by herself. Although Yun Nuoxing didn't understand what she was so happy about, he walked over to little purple soul and picked her up. He stroked her long purple hair and smiled. Let's go, little girl. Brother, aren't you going to cultivate? The little girl tossed around in his arms for a while before stopping. Her big gem-like eyes looked at the few people who were cultivating, then looked at Yun Nuoxing and asked curiously. Yes, I don't need to sit down and cultivate like this. I want to walk around in the yin-yang sky, Yun Nuoxing said. Yes, I understand. Brother is the best. Little purple soul laughed happily and opened her arms to hug Yun Nuoxing's neck. Yun Nuoxing smiled bitterly. How could she tell that he was the best? Yun Nuoxing hugged her tightly and looked at everyone for a while. After he felt that there was no problem, he quietly snuck out. Even if there was a problem, he could rush back immediately. The thick clouds in the sky were divided into 2 halves, and there was a tiny crack in the middle. It was as if there was a transparent barrier there, isolating the clouds formed by the two types of energy. The snowflakes falling from the sky also slowly disappeared, as if the snowstorm had disappeared and the sun was about to arrive. However, there was still no sun here, and the only sunlight that could be seen came from the crack in the thick clouds. Yun Nuoshing and the others entered the Inyang sky much earlier, but most of the time, they were diving deep in the Yin Lake and the Yang Lake. At this time, it was time for the energy tide in the Inyang sky to recede. He could already feel that many people were pouring in, but the energy gathering area at both ends was like a forbidden area, and no one dared to set foot in it. Roar! Roars that shook mountains and rivers came from the ground. A powerful magical beast at the beginner level of the god level woke up and ate an intruder who was alone and focused on collecting all kinds of treasures. The bloody scene made many people in the distance turn pale, and they hurriedly turned and flew in other directions. The huge eyes of the magical beast that had just eaten a beginner god expert suddenly trembled, and a berserk aura gushed out of its body. It raised its head abruptly, and its pupils shrunk to the size of a needle. A tiny figure appeared in its line of sight. It was so tiny that it was smaller than its fingernail, but it felt as if it was heavier than the heavens and the earth. It had the aura of a superior being, and it had no choice but to submit to it. "Hey, big guy!" Yun Nuoshing descended from the sky with Little Purple Soul on his shoulder. He landed in front of the magical beast that was comparable to a god king and smiled warmly at it. Roar! When the big guy saw Yun Nuoshing suddenly appear in front of it, it was so scared that its scales stood up. Its huge body retreated with a rumble, and it kicked over a mountain before it could stabilize itself. Its eyes were filled with fear as it stared at Yun Nuoshing, and there was fear in its low growl. Yun Nuoshing and Little Purple Soul covered their ears. After the growl subsided, the former said, "Stop growling, or I'll roast you and eat you. I'm hungry. Is there any fun place here?" The giant beast quickly pointed in a direction with its head. Yun Nuoshing nodded, turned around, and left. The former heaved a sigh of relief, and blew away half of the mountain. When it heard Yun Nuoshing say that he was going to eat it, it was so scared that it almost peed its pants. At this time, Yun Nuoshing was in the area on the Yangyang side. He could sense that most of the people who entered here were young men. There seemed to be some women as well, but there were not many of them. It was considered not bad if there was one woman among 100 men. Moreover, they probably needed to come here because of the Xian method or Xian formula. The bottom layer of the Yin-Yang world that was sealed was somewhat beyond his expectations. Because of the environment here, these magical beasts were stronger than ordinary magical beasts outside. Their bodies also carried rich yang energy. However, it was fine if there were magical beasts here, but there was actually an intact environment here. These plants survived under the nourishment of this strange energy. After being surprised for a while, Yun Nuoshing quickly calmed down. He had seen stranger situations in his memory, so he was not surprised for too long. At most, he felt that this place was a little novel. Following the direction that the giant beast pointed, Yun Nuoshing sensed a large amount of life aura gathered in a place. It seemed that many people were gathered there, and there's a very strange fragrance. Yun Nuoshing sniffled and muttered, "Is it delicious?" Little Purple Soul hugged his head and giggled. "It should be. What can't be eaten these days?" Yun Nuoshing smiled bitterly and shook his head. Suddenly, a voice came from his soul. "I smell the scent of azure dragon." Yun Nuoshing was startled. This voice belonged to Little White. When he heard the content, his eyebrows were about to fly up. He quickly pulled out a trace of his consciousness and dived into his soul. Seeing Yun Nuoshing rush in, Purple Knight calmly put down the teacup and said jokingly, "Oh, you came in so quickly. It seems that Little Star has some thoughts about the other two mythological beasts." Yun Nuoshing smiled bitterly. He hugged Lan Xen, who rushed over, rubbed Yishi's face, and said a few words to Kai Xia. Then, he looked at Little White. However, he was stunned for a moment. He looked left and right and realized that one of the figures had disappeared. If it's Fu Qing, she's inside. She's hiding in the house and sleeping. She said that she wants to replenish the energy that she used for dozens of eras. Purple Knight raised his chin towards the mansion made of flames. He knew who he was looking for. You didn't see her the last time you came in, right? Scratching his cheek, Yun Nuoxing sighed. Then, he turned to look at Little White and said nervously, Little Blue's aura? The four mythological beasts could sense each other. In this aspect, even Yun Nuoxing could not compare to the telepathy between them. There's a weak aura. It's not the Azure Dragon. She's probably found a place to sleep. I can't contact her for a while. The Black Tortoise is slow. If you want to contact him, you can't do it without having the mentality to live a normal life. Little White nodded and jumped up from the bed in the courtyard. It landed on Yun Nuoxing's head and said, Maybe it's something that the Azure Dragon left behind. If the aura is stronger, I can probably find her directly. Well, it's probably not easy to find her. That stupid housekeeper is very good at hide and seek. Yes. Yun Nuoxing nodded, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Seeing Purple Knight and the others looking at him in confusion, he couldn't help but say, Little Blue once played hide and seek with us. Even with the soul contract and Little White's telepathy, we still searched for 1,000 years before we found Little Blue. That fellow went back to the realm of the gods and slept for 1,000 years. 1,000 years. He put us in another world and ran back to sleep. When this was mentioned, Little White jumped up and his fur stood on end. Yishi was shocked. What kind of mysterious hide and seek is this? She grabbed Little White from her head and placed it on her hand to stroke its fur. Only then did she put it back on the bed and said, Then I'll go and take a look. It'll be good if I can find it successfully. Don't worry, she's sleeping in the realm of the gods. No one can find her. If everything goes well. Little White was suddenly stunned and looked at Yun Nuoxing suspiciously. You've recovered your memories? The part about Yu Ying? No, it can't be considered recovered. Yun Nuoxing shook her head and pointed at her temple. Don't I have a few sealed memory cores in my sea of memories? There are some fragments in there. I would occasionally open them to take a look. Many of them are memory fragments, and I can't connect them. However, I would occasionally come across Feng Yuying's memories. It seems like even the samsara didn't completely erase all my memories. Well, you haven't even recovered the Shadow Emperor's memories. Even Quarter Moon's memories are only 90%, Purple Knight said softly. Ziyi said softly. Even if one could avoid reincarnation, one would still have to pay a price. Those memories were only one of the prices. Yun Nuoxing waved her hand and changed the topic. She coughed lightly. Well, then I'll go and see what's up with that aura. Little White, Purple Knight, and the others nodded and habitually reminded Yun Nuoxing to leave the spiritual world. Chapter 945. His figure turned into a pale golden light and swept across the sky. His terrifying speed made many people unable to detect him before he disappeared. Those who accidentally spied on him would turn their gazes away with their faces covered in cold sweat. A person with such speed was definitely not someone to be trifled with. It was better not to look at him as much as possible. The aura is gradually decreasing. Yun Nuoxing looked around. At such a fast speed, he swept through everything that existed. He could feel that in this area the number of people and magical beasts had decreased a lot. Only the place in front of him where many auras of life gathered had not weakened. The fog in this area dissipated a lot. In Yinyang World, except for the snake-shaped mountain range in the center, it was basically flatland. There would also be small hills scattered in every corner. This time, after Yinyang World ebbed, there were very few safe areas. The two eyes were not within the range, but even if they were within the range, no one could go there. Most of those who entered Yin-Yang world were low-level gods, and the number of mid-level gods was very small. As for high-level gods, it was estimated that they did not exist. As he gradually approached that place, Yun Nuoxing lowered his body slightly. The fog was thick at a high place, and he could not see anything clearly. The vision blessed by the eye of the ocean was also blocked a lot. As for the evil spirit eye, as soon as he opened it, all he could see was thick energy colors, and he could not see anything clearly. When his body lowered a lot, he almost reached his destination. Yun Nuoxing was just about to stop, but his vision suddenly became clear. The fog dissipated and his vision was extremely wide. In a large circle, there was no fog covering it. It was as if he had drilled into the eye of a seemingly calm storm. Yun Nuoxing was stunned for a moment. Her figure stopped in the sky without leaving a trace. She cast her gaze to the ground. A lake had appeared very clearly in this place. The lake water was orange-red, as if it was the color of the setting sun. It contained a huge amount of yang energy. In the center of the lake, there was a lone island about 10 feet wide. It was bare. Other than a large green-red tree, there was nothing else. There was not even a blade of grass. This water. Yun Nuoxing blinked and stared at it for a while. When she looked in the direction of the source, she immediately understood. This was the lake water that flowed out from Yang Lake. It had been diluted many times. Perhaps it had been diluted 10,000 times, or even 100,000 times, but its energy was still very rich. Perhaps it was extremely rare for the large group of people gathered below. The crowd gathered at the lakeside started to clamor. Those clamors seemed to be screaming, but also seemed to be encouraging someone. And in the crowd, there was also the sound of energy surging. It was obvious that there were people fighting inside, causing Yun Nuoxing to be extremely astonished. There were actually people gathered here to fight? Moreover, the others were still in the mood to be onlookers? The paradise was right in front of them. Shouldn't they be sitting down to rest and cultivate? However, a moment later, she understood. At the front of the crowd, a tall figure appeared. He was dressed in a red light armor that flickered with a bright light like the sun. His exposed arms were covered in green-colored scales that were extremely shiny. Those were dragon scales and were extremely hard. It was basically difficult for attacks of the same level to destroy them. A green-colored spear and a red-colored spear floated on both sides of the figure. His eyes were glowing with a golden light, and his mouth and nose were breathing hot air. Rich mysterious yang qi was swirling around his body. In front of the figure, there were 5 figures who were panting. Their battle robes were somewhat tattered and stained with blood. They looked a little disheveled. It seemed that the 5 of them were at a disadvantage in their battle with the figure, who looked like a half-human and half-dragon. Among the 5 figures, Yun Nuoxing had seen 2 of them before. They were the 2 figures who sat in front of Liu Bai in the Shui Yun Pavilion. One of them was a valiant man, and the other was a languid woman in a yellow dress. However, at this time, the beautiful woman had a murderous look on her face. The other 3 were all men. Yun Nuoxing had not seen them before. Perhaps they had also appeared in the Shui Yun Pavilion, but he had not noticed them. Brother, they are all young experts of the Kuan-Yuan region, right? Little Purple Soul grabbed Yun Nuoxing's long hair and weaved something on it. Her tender voice was heard. Ah yes, they are quite disheveled. Yun Nuoxing nodded and said casually. These 5 people were all experts who had gone through the 6th transformation of the Divine Sun. They should be the 2nd-generation experts of the younger generation. The 5 of them had not been able to gain the upper hand against the green figure even after joining forces. The latter's strength was obviously somewhat terrifying. The strength of a peak Divine Sun is a bit high. Is he a guardian? Yun Nuoxing muttered to himself as his gaze drifted over. He did not care about the figure. What he cared about was the big green and red tree on the small island behind it. That's the one. The tree that is tainted with the aura of the green dragon. Little White suddenly became excited and jumped into the air. There should be something buried under the tree. The energy from the green dragon has become the tree's nutrient. Originally, the tree was only related to Yang Lake. Now, it has been tainted with the aura of the green dragon. Oh, then I have to make a trip. Yun Nuoshing nodded casually. With a thought, his body fell down from the air. The valiant man was half kneeling on the ground. The long spear in his hand was stuck in the ground. Drops of hot blood slid down from his forehead. He looked at the others with some unwillingness in his eyes. They were the strongest experts here. They did not expect that they would not be able to gain the upper hand in front of the Guardian even after joining forces. This was the most ideal location. If they gave up here, they would have to try toward the shrinking point of the energy tide. Perhaps they would be like those monsters and try to go deeper. They might have unexpected gains, but it was more likely that they would die. Even the borderlands were very dangerous. Ordinary demigods could not enter the Yin-Yang world. Even if they were divine sons, it would not be so easy to gain anything. Are we going to risk our lives? The valiant man's face was gloomy. He looked at the others, and a hint of determination flashed across his eyes. Just as they were about to risk their lives, the green figure suddenly raised his head. His red eyes cast a cold and merciless gaze behind them. At the same time, he held the two long spears tightly in his hands. A deep voice with a rumbling echo was heard. "Intruder, die." The seemingly calm voice contained cold, killing intent. The five of them were stunned, especially when they saw the green figure grab the two long spears. Their expressions were even more solemn. Until now, it had not touched the two long spears. Was it going to do it for real now? Very soon, they realized that something was not right. That emotionless gaze was not looking at any of the five of them. Instead, it was looking behind them. At this moment, the voices of the people behind them had become much softer. There were even some doubtful and shocked voices that were emitted, causing them to be puzzled. When they turned their heads around, that colorful figure was reflected in their eyes, causing them to be stunned. "It's her." The woman in the yellow dress was slightly taken aback. She had a very deep impression of this dangerous little sister. At the very least, not everyone had the courage to warn the entire Water Cloud Pavilion. A single word from her might even cause a group of people to attack her. At this time, the green figure seemed to be talking to him. Yun Nuoshing acted as if she did not hear anything. She ignored everyone's gazes and walked straight ahead, directly passing by the five people. Little Purple Soul on her shoulder blinked her large eyes curiously. She could feel many gazes on her, and then these gazes turned to Yun Nuoshing with even stranger expressions. Who would bring a child to a fight? Stop right there or die. The green figure raised the red spear in his right hand and pointed it at Yun Nuoshing from afar. His monstrous, killing intent materialized, causing the sky to darken a lot. A terrifying aura spread out in all directions. The five people hurriedly retreated, afraid that they would be affected by this even more powerful energy. The five people's eyes flickered. They seemed to want to say something, but when they thought of what he said in the pavilion, they inexplicably shut their mouths. They subconsciously felt that if they said anything, it would be very awkward. Yun Nuoshing turned a deaf ear to his words. She lowered her right hand and put two fingers together. A wisp of extremely cold energy quietly condensed. Boom! As he approached, the green figure's eyes exploded with unparalleled killing intent. He stomped on the ground, creating a crater. His figure directly shattered the space and appeared in front of Yun Nuoshing in an instant. His two spears carried the power of thunder as they rushed towards Yun Nuoshing. Dark, profound ice. Ta! A soft cry and the snap of a finger were emitted at the same time. The entire space emitted a loud sound of ice being formed. Soon after, the area 1 meter around the green figure was directly frozen into a solid block of ice. Dark energy flickered and surged within the ice block. It was extremely frightening. The cold energy caused the energy in the lake 10 meters away to quiet down. Even the entire area had become quiet. The majestic killing intent and vast energy had turned into a deathly silence. The onlookers behind him were dumbfounded. It was as if someone had grabbed their necks, and they were unable to make a sound. The faces of the 5 people twitched violently. That thing that they had been working on for half an hour had been destroyed just like that? This guy is just a demigod, right? Is he even human? The valiant man only felt his heart tired. Where did this monster come from, Ta? Yun Nuoshing did not stop walking. She snapped her fingers again. Dark energy crazily surged in the solid ice. Following a command, the layer of solid ice rumbled. Inside it, 10 types of elements crazily intertwined, devouring the green figure that was covered by the solid ice. Crack! A few seconds later, a shattering sound came from the solid black ice. With a loud bang, it exploded into chunks of ice that flew out in all directions, leaving behind only a cloud of ice powder and icy mist that hadn't dissipated in time. As for the cyan figure, even the weapon that was holding it had already disappeared. Pervert. The 5 people bitterly said in their hearts. Dealing with the green figure meant that they could ascend to the Red Lake. However, at this moment, no one dared to make any movements. Their eyes did not blink as they stared at Yun Nuoshing, who was leisurely walking on the surface of the lake as if she was taking a stroll. That killing god was still there. Where would they find the courage to walk over? The valiant man and the other 4 hurriedly sat down to rest. In any case, it seemed that they would not be able to enter for a while. Ignoring the others, Yun Nuoshing came to the big tree in the center of the island in the middle of the lake. She raised her head and saw a very strange fruit growing on the green and red tree. It was also green and red in color. The shape of the fruit was like a sun, but it also looked like a dragon that was about to soar into the sky. Little Purple Soul excitedly jumped up from Yun Nuoshing's shoulder and flew towards the fruit on the tree. She reached out her small hand and plucked a fruit that was half her size. Then, under the horrified gazes of the people in the distance, she put it in her mouth and took a bite. The crunching sound of her chewing made everyone shudder. Damn it, the fruit from the Yin-Yang Sky Lake. She ate it just like that. What a waste of God's gift, what a waste of God's gift. Everyone gritted their teeth and roared in their hearts. However, they did not dare to say it out loud. They were afraid that with a snap of her fingers, they would turn into ice dregs. After taking a bite of the fruit, Little Purple Soul suddenly frowned. She wiped the juice from the corner of her mouth with her small hand and mumbled, "Ugh, it doesn't taste good." The group of people almost vomited when they heard that. Yun Nuoshing did not know whether to laugh or cry. She lifted the little girl up and placed her on her shoulder. Then, she lowered her head and looked for something on the ground. The little girl was still hugging the fruit that was a little too big for her. She took a bite of it from time to time. Her small face was scrunched up as if it was disgusting. If it's disgusting, then don't eat it. Yun Nuoshing tilted her head and looked at the little girl who was frowning. She did not know whether to laugh or cry. Ugh! But it's such a waste. It's really disgusting. Little Purple Soul shook her head and took another bite as she mumbled. Yun Nuoshing's face pulled a bitter smile. This little girl, after a few minutes of sensing her surroundings, Yun Nuoshing raised her slender eyebrows and a faint joy appeared on her pretty face. Then, she squatted down and pressed her palms on the ground. A suction force erupted from her palms. She clenched her fists tightly. Suddenly, a deep claw mark appeared on the ground that was being sucked in by the suction force. Then, the piece of ground disappeared. With a wave of his hand, Yun Nuoshing flicked off the soil in his palm. Once again, he aimed his palm at the ground that had been dug out. With a burst of suction force, he dug out a handful of soil and then casually threw it away. After a while, he stopped. In the pit that was already a few meters deep, he saw entangled tree roots, and within these entangled tree roots, there was a piece of green lustrous metal fragment. Yun Nuoxing carefully used her energy to pry open the tree root. The suction force from her palms sucked the metal fragment into her hands. Yun Nuoxing took a closer look and realized that it was not a metal fragment, but a piece of scale. Moreover, it was a piece of scale fragment that exuded an ancient aura. It seemed to have been there for a long time. This is it. This is the green dragon's scale. Judging from its aura, it should be the same as the one I shed back then. But this is just a fragment. It's not a carrier of energy. Little White immediately became excited. However, after carefully sensing for a while, she was a little surprised. She sighed helplessly and said, "There's not much of its aura left. There's no aura of the green dragon nearby. I wonder if I can find the exact location of that stupid dragon." "Well, let's give it a try." Yun Nuoxing shrugged helplessly. She threw the piece of scale fragment into her spiritual world and handed it over to Little White. After filling the hole with a wave of her hand, Yun Nuoxing turned around and saw a group of people staring at her with hope. She was stunned, but she did not care about them. Since she had achieved her goal, she did not want to stay any longer. She gently stomped her feet on the ground. A teleportation array instantly appeared and brought her away. Yun Nuoxing's sudden disappearance stunned the people in the distance and the 5 people. She left just like that? Generally speaking, shouldn't she be cultivating and tempering herself inside? Leaving just like that was giving the opportunity to others. However, they did not know that Yun Nuoxing did not need to be tempered here. In her opinion, this so-called Yang Lake was far inferior to the Real Yang Lake. Cultivating here would only be a waste of time. However, this was just as well. For others who needed it, they could not ask for anything more. Go ahead if you want." Among the 5 people, one of them suddenly stood up and picked up the weapon beside him. Then, he turned around and left expressionlessly. It was as if he did not care about the Yang Lake behind him. His pride did not allow him to enjoy the spoils of war that he had picked up before he passed the trial. The others were also stunned when they saw his figure dashing into the distance. They looked at each other for a long time. Their feelings were very complicated. Yun Nuoxing was already far away. She did not know what these people were thinking. She did not even want to look at them because there was no one else beside her. She hurried past and left in a hurry. She tossed the green dragon scale fragment in her hand and thought for a moment. Then, she looked in the direction of Shao Yin and nodded. With a stomp of her foot, a formation appeared and her figure instantly disappeared. The light faded and a thought was transmitted. Several layers of energy barriers spontaneously moved, covering a range of 10 feet. Yun Nuoxing slowly opened her eyes. She was slightly stunned. What appeared in front of her was not the Yin Lake. Her soul power fused into the void and probed in all directions. Only then did she realize that she was quite a distance away from the Yin Lake. She was probably at the retreat point of the tide. It seemed that the rich yang energy here had blocked her teleportation. Just as she was about to withdraw her soul power, she suddenly sensed 2 weak auras. Furthermore, she felt a very faint sense of familiarity. This inexplicable sense of familiarity caused her body to tremble just as she was about to move. She turned around and looked in the direction of the 2 people. After hesitating for a moment, the eye of the ocean crossed a large distance and saw the appearance of the 2 people. They were 2 very young figures. The girl's eyebrows were like willows. She was tall and her skin was like ice crystals. She was wearing a long black dress. Under the long dress, her beautiful and voluptuous figure was exposed. Her pretty face was a little apathetic and pale. The black Mei Mao looked around with a hint of vigilance. There was a trace of bright red blood at the side of her cherry lips. Next to the girl was a young man in a white robe. He had a handsome face and an unconcealable wry smile on his face. His eyebrows drooped lazily, giving off a sense of cynicism. His black eyes revealed a dangerous look, as if a beast had fallen into a trap, as if he was planning to perish together with someone. The two of them didn't look very big, and their strength was only at the peak of the demigod rank. They appeared to be quite weak among the large group of people who entered the yin-yang world. However, since the two of them could enter the energy tide withdrawal point, which was a rather dangerous place for others, they obviously had some extraordinary means. Both of them had some injuries on their bodies, and their auras were weak and fluctuating. They should have suffered some internal injuries. Judging from their vigilant gazes, they seemed to be on guard against something. Perhaps the person or creature who injured them hadn't gone far. But what puzzled him was, where did that sense of familiarity come from? Appearance? It seemed a little. Their auras were a little similar, but there was only a very faint sense of familiarity. He couldn't find the source. It was as if he had woken up from a dream and suddenly had a sense of déjà vu. His mind was a little messy, and he didn't recover until Little Purple Soul pulled his long hair. After hesitating for a while, he let out a sigh. "Let's go and take a look." Chapter 946. The energy in the yin-yang world was too dense, and it was somewhat obstructive to the movement. Even if his soul merged with the void to detect the location, it was still quite difficult to go there without alerting the enemy. At least when Yun Nuoshing carefully crept all the way, the two people were no longer at the original place. They left. Yun Nuoshing was stunned and stopped in front of a tall tree. This was the place where he had detected the two people. At this time, they had already left. There were still 2 pools of blood on the ground, and their aura remained. It seemed that they had just left. On the surrounding ground, there were many black marks. The strange marks seemed to be left behind by something that had been burned, which made Yun Nuoshing very puzzled. He walked to the nearest black mark and squatted down. He pinched the scorched ground with his fingers and sensed for a while. Then his expression changed slightly. This was a trace left behind by someone who had been burned to ashes by the huge amount of yang energy here, and it was all around. There were more than a dozen people around. There were also some remnants of broken weapons on the ground. Judging from their aura, they did not belong to the two people. Then, they should belong to the dozen people who had died without leaving behind a body. He looked around and merged his soul power into the void again, chasing after the aura that had been artificially erased in the space, leaving behind only a very faint aura. After chasing for dozens of miles, he caught sight of the two people again. It seemed that someone was chasing them in the direction of Shaoyin. Suddenly, Yun Nuoshing's eyes trembled. He slowly stood up, looked around, and said, "Come out. You don't have to show off your little concealment skills in front of me. I can smell your aura through the void." Swoosh. As soon as he finished speaking, there was a sudden sound of wind breaking in the sky above this place. Then, more than a dozen people who were holding up an energy barrier suddenly appeared in front of Yun Nuoshing. This group of people was dressed in completely uniform black robes. Their whole body was wrapped up, and only a pair of eyes were exposed. They were also full of murderous intent. The whole group was like an assassin group, and even if one sensed carefully, it was difficult to sense the life aura of these people. If it were other people, they would have been ambushed. Unfortunately, Yun Nuoshing's detection was something that even high-level gods might not be able to avoid. Looking at this group of people who obviously did not come with good intentions, Yun Nuoshing twisted his neck, grabbed Little Purple Soul from his shoulder, and hugged it in his arms. After confirming that he did not know this group of people, he said calmly, "What's the matter?" That group of people did not answer. A person who seemed to be the leader raised his chin to the person beside him and pointed at Yun Nuoshing. That person's figure suddenly disappeared. At the same time, a black shadow quietly appeared behind Yun Nuoshing. The dagger in his hand was glowing with cold light and carried a biting cold murderous intent, and he violently stabbed towards Yun Nuoshing. A golden light flashed in front of that person, and he was stunned. Then, in a split second, an extremely strong sense of danger rose in his heart. It was as if he was facing a life-and-death threat, and he immediately reacted, escape. But before he could express this thought in action, a huge force suddenly choked his neck, making him unable to breathe. That person widened his eyes in horror and lowered his gaze in disbelief. He saw Yun Nuoxing's right hand choking his neck and lifting him up high. A pair of colorful eyes revealed an indifferent and ruthless light, which made him feel cold to the bone. He did not even see how Yun Nuoxing attacked. A killer? Yun Nuoxing said with a faint smile. He looked around and saw that the person who seemed to be the leader seemed to be giving some orders. He could not help but smile slightly. It seems that you won't say anything. Then, go to sleep. These 3 words swept out with a chill that was enough to freeze the world. In an instant, a snowstorm suddenly blew in this place with rich yang energy. Black snowflakes fluttered and fell to the ground, freezing the ground into a solid block of black ice. When the wind blew, it left behind a trace of ice that was visible to the naked eye. This chill froze the surroundings several kilometers into ice. Looking at the dozen or so ice sculptures in front of him, Yun Nuoxing's eyes were indifferent. He casually flung the ice in his hand away, and it shattered into dozens of pieces when it hit the ground. He clapped his hands, turned around, and rushed in the direction where he had sensed the 2 people's auras. Boom! Boom! Violent energy surged endlessly in this place. The yang energy in this area was used as a weapon to suppress the 2 people from all directions. The weapons brought with them a great sense of oppression, sealing off all the escape routes of the 2 people. The 2 of them were ambushed and surrounded here. There were dozens of people, and they were all beginner god-level experts. All kinds of methods and weapons were used one after another, exhausting them to the point of exhaustion. They also had to use all their strength to resist the yang energy in this place. Under the 2 layers of oppression, they quickly retreated. However, the other party seemed to have some misgivings or had some ulterior motive. They had many opportunities to kill them, but they did not. Moreover, their gazes were like a cat playing with a mouse. At this time, the special barrier to resist the yin-yang world was still supported by the girl. He really didn't have any strength left. The energy in the yin-yang world is chaotic. You can't escape anymore. Even the barrier can't last for 5 minutes. Come back with us obediently, and you can still live. The person who seemed to be the leader walked out and sneered. Bah! If I go back with you, I'll be completely finished. The young man fiercely spat before he let out a cold laugh. Then, he extended his blood-stained middle finger at the leader. His eyes were sharp as he said, "Even if I die in battle and perish together with all of you, I will never let you succeed." In that case, the leader's eyes gradually turned gloomy, and he waved his arm. "Then you'd better go together. If you want to blame someone, blame your own birth." A storm of energy burst out from the bodies of the dozens of god masters, triggering the energy of the yin-yang world. The energy that was not supposed to be used by humans condensed into a violent energy storm, which fell from the sky. The violent power made the 2 of them turn paler. The energy that was as hot as the sun was rapidly magnified in their eyes. The hot wind that came toward them seemed to set them on fire. The oppressive feeling almost tore their bodies apart. The young man, who had no other means, gritted his teeth, turned his back to the energy that was as hot as the sun, and hugged the girl into his arms. Ignoring her screams, he closed his eyes tightly. Click! There was a crisp snap of fingers. Perhaps it was a snap of fingers. The sound was too subtle, but it was inexplicably profound. This strange sound instantly spread to everyone's ears, and everyone was stunned. The leader and the others turned around in astonishment. Before they saw anything, their bodies became stiff in an instant, and their consciousnesses disappeared into the depths of the ice in an instant. It was as if the hot summer sun had entered a cold winter in an instant. The biting cold made the young man, who closed his eyes and waited for death, shiver violently. The girl in his arms also shivered. She opened Mei Mao's eyes wide and looked behind him. The violent energy that was as hot as the sun was now completely fixed in the space. The ice had perfectly preserved the appearance of the energy, and it was fixed in the space like a piece of art with a black luster. The energy contained in the ice that was close to her made her shiver, and she hurriedly pulled the young man back for a distance. The young man also felt that something was wrong at this time. He hurriedly turned around and saw a huge black ice block that was hundreds of feet long, standing in front of him like a huge iceberg. He was so shocked that his snot flowed out. Ignoring the pain all over his body, he hurriedly looked around, but he didn't see the group of god experts. He couldn't help but be stunned. "Sis, does this count as saving us?" The young man pinched his thigh, and the pain made him suck in a breath of cold air. Only then did he realize that it wasn't a dream, and he couldn't help but ask. The girl also shook her head in a daze. After a while, she came back to her senses. After discovering that it wasn't an illusion, she also heaved a sigh of relief. She raised her head and threw Mei Mao at the energy ice sculpture that had been turned into ice. The person there didn't hide his figure. He raised his hand with difficulty and clasped his fist to the top, saying, "Thank you for saving my life." Seeing that the other party had discovered her, of course, it was also because she didn't deliberately hide. Yun Nuoxing jumped down from the black iceberg and descended from the sky with several layers of energy barriers. Those layers of energy barriers immediately enveloped the two of them. The energy barriers that were already on the verge of collapse directly dissipated under the stronger impact. Both of them were stunned. As soon as they reacted, they felt an unprecedented sense of relief. When they looked back, they saw several layers of powerful and complicated energy barriers that completely blocked the influence of the yin-yang world on them. They immediately heaved a sigh of relief. This is purely relying on strength to resist the yin-yang world. This person can't be underestimated. I don't know if he's an enemy or a friend. We'd better be careful. The siblings looked at each other, and some information currents that others couldn't understand flowed through their eyes. In just a glance, the two of them exchanged such thoughts. However, they still felt relieved for the time being. Only then did they turn their heads to look at Yun Nuoxing. When they saw Yun Nuoxing like this, they couldn't help but be stunned. It had to be said that Yun Nuoxing's image at this time was too confusing. Anyone who saw her at first glance would exclaim in admiration, "What a beautiful little sister that could topple a country!" It was just a little strange that she was carrying a little girl on her shoulder. It was also because of Yun Nuoxing's appearance that the siblings let down their guard a little. However, there was still a trace of doubt in their hearts. When did this monster appear in the Kuan-Yuan region? Why didn't they know about it? Can you still move? Yun Nuoxing glanced at the two of them, blinked her eyes, and revealed a faint smile. She folded her hands in front of her and said, "This is not the place to talk. If you can still move, follow me. If you can't move, just blink twice. I'll take you to a place where no one can get close to." The siblings were stunned. They looked at each other, and then blinked hard at Yun Nuoxing. Seeing that the two of them were blinking their eyes, Yun Nuoxing's cheeks twitched. She nodded, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. With a wave of her hand, gentle water elements gushed out from her body, forming a huge bubble that wrapped the two of them. Then, with a flash of golden light, the two of them disappeared. "Thank you for saving us, Fairy. My name is Gu Chen, and this is my sister, Fairy Gu. May I know your name?" The young man cupped his hands and smiled. He kept looking at Yun Nuoxing, hoping to find some unique characteristic. A person with such strength should not be an ordinary person. Yun Nuoxing looked deeply at the young man for a long time, until the two of them had goosebumps. Then, she sighed and said, "My surname is Yun, and I'm a man." The two of them were horrified, and they looked at her in horror. Little Purple Soul continued to grab Yun Nuoxing's long hair. She could not help but mutter, "Brother looks so much like sister. I've been mistaken for him so many times." The two of them were even more horrified. At first, the Gu siblings wanted to tell Yun Nuoshing not to run outside, but when they saw that he was going deeper and deeper into the energy tide, they felt a little uneasy. They wanted to say something, but the sense of security that those few layers of barriers gave them was too strong, so they couldn't find an entry point even if they wanted to say something. Helpless, they could only shut their mouths and curl up in the bubble that Yun Nuoshing made, following him into the energy tide. Yun Nuoshing was used to hiding his identity, so he did not use the light element. However, his body was strengthened by the light element all year round. Even if he did not use the light element, his speed was many times faster than people of the same level. Therefore, it did not take him too long to reach the little Een Lake. Sitting cross-legged in front of the Een Lake, Gu Chun rubbed his sore shoulders. He looked at Yun Nuoshing, who was standing in front of the Een Lake, thinking about something. Gu Chun rolled his eyes and suddenly said, "Brother Yun, were you sent here by someone? Are you secretly protecting us?" Hearing this, the fairy also turned her gaze. It was obvious that she was also very concerned about this matter. "Why do you think so?" Yun Nuoshing tilted his head and looked at the two of them, asking. Gu Chun scratched his head and laughed dryly, "Because it's too timely. Moreover, we have never met Brother Yun before." Yun Nuoshing was speechless. Because they had never met, did they think that he would not save them? Well, under normal circumstances it was not a problem to think that way. If he did not feel an inexplicable sense of familiarity from the two of them, he would not have bothered to save them. Being hunted down and killed was something that happened every day in the God realm. It was impossible for him to save everyone. He did not have that kind of free time, nor did he have the heart of a saint. After looking at Gu Chun indifferently for a while, Yun Nuoshing shook his head lightly. "I was inexplicably surrounded by that group of people and suffered a round of assassination attempts. When I heard them mention the two of you, I was a little curious, so I chased after you." "So, who were those people?" "Enemies, perhaps?" Gu Chun smiled bitterly. He cupped his fists at Yun Nuoshing and said, "Anyway, thank you so much, Brother Yun. I'm really sorry to have involved you in this." "It's nothing. I only saved you because I wanted to know who these bastards were who attacked indiscriminately and tried to silence us. However, it seems that you have your own difficulties, so let's forget about it." Yun Nuoshing waved his hand, looking as if he did not care. Gu Chun breathed a sigh of relief. If Yun Nuoshing continued to ask, no matter how he looked at it, it would not be easy for him to hide it. Moreover, even if you tell me, I may not have heard of them. I am not from the Kuan Yuan region, so I don't know much about the forces in the Kuan Yuan region. Yun Nuoshing shook his head. Just as he was about to urge them to recover quickly, the ancient fairy interrupted him. "The people from the Lingyun battle court, if I'm not wrong, their fighting styles are very similar." The ancient fairy said softly, "They are a very famous first-rate force in the northeast region of the Kuan Yuan region. They have always been at odds with the forces we belong to. They have been at war with us for many years." "Elder sister." Gu Chun smiled bitterly. He nudged the ancient fairy with his elbow and sent her a message with his eyes, without batting an eyelid. Yun Nuoshing looked at her with surprise. He waited for her to finish before he smiled and said, "Look, even if you tell me, I wouldn't know about it. I've never heard of it before. It's the Lingyun battle court. Therefore, compared to who they are and where you come from, I'm more curious about what you are doing here. It seems that you are not completely forced to come here, right?" Yun Nuoshing said casually with a faint smile. Whether it was the people from the Lingyun battle court or the siblings, they all had simple methods to offset the power of the energy tide in the Yin-Yang world to the greatest extent. It was obvious that they came prepared. He did not believe that they came here simply because they were hunted down. However, he was just curious. When Xian and the others were cultivating, he could only come out to find something to do to pass the time. Chapter 947. Inside the Een Lake, Energy surged as monstrous waves rose several thousand feet into the air, forming a huge wall of water. The thick layer of energy clouds in the sky also fell down like a funnel. The yin and yang energies that were originally repelling each other in the sky were accurately divided into two by a force of energy. The yang energy was repelled, while the yin energy fell to the ground without any reservation. It was like the scene of the sea and the sky surging. Endless yin energy gathered from all directions, creating a cold whirlwind. The cold yin energy caused the space to crackle as ice crystals condensed and gathered along with the storm. On the lakeside, Yun Nuoxing's hands danced as if she was controlling the cold whirlwind. She clapped her hands together and changed her hand seals from time to time. Every time her hand seals changed, the gathered energy would be fiercely squeezed towards the center by a huge force. Then, she controlled the energy that was rushing over from afar to gather and compress it again. After this cycle repeated dozens of times, the storm showed signs of weakening. Condense! A soft shout from the lakeside caused the gradually weakening storm to dissipate. An extremely strong pressure with the power to collapse space crazily squeezed towards the center of the storm. Under that huge pressure, the ball of condensed energy that had been compressed dozens of times began to tremble violently. Powerful energy shockwaves burst out from the ball of chaotic energy, causing waves of several hundred feet tall to surge towards the lakeside. However, the wall of water that was close to Yun Nuoxing's lakeside quietly collapsed when it was only 100 meters away. It fell back into the lake, creating countless splashes of cold yin energy, and mist covered the lakeside. Ding! Following an extremely clear sound, like the sound of a sword gently piercing a gem, Yun Nuoxing's hand seals dissipated, and the shock waves also dissipated. In the center of the yin lake, the ball of chaotic energy had already disappeared. What appeared there was a pale white diamond-shaped crystal that was about a foot tall. Yun Nuoxing waved his hand and took the pale white crystal into his hand. His colorful eyes stared at it for a while, and he nodded in satisfaction when he felt the pure yin energy. He waved his hand and put it away. This energy crystal had condensed extremely pure yin energy. He had used pure energy to compress it into a crystal form, and it was used as an attachment for tracking the Azure Dragon's aura. In other words, it was a carrier. However, without the ability of the spirit receiving divine body to compress the energy, it's a bit difficult. Yun Nuoxing squeezed his palms and felt that his energy was severely depleted. He shook his head helplessly. The ability of the spirit receiving divine body had been weakened by nearly 80% after the tree of divinity was separated. He could feel that his control over the energy had obviously weakened. He turned his head and saw the ancient fairy and Gu Chun staring at him in shock. He couldn't help but be stunned. He scratched his head and asked, "What's wrong?" A puzzled voice made the siblings shiver. They quickly came back to their senses, and then they put their heads together. Gu Chun whispered, "Sister, this person is so dangerous. He's really dangerous. I've never seen anyone compress energy in such a messy way, not even the high-level gods at home." The ancient fairy nodded her head with deep feelings. The way Yun Nuoxing compressed energy looked quite dangerous. If it were someone else, who didn't compress the energy bit by bit when they were outside the body. Yun Nuoxing, on the other hand, threw large lumps of energy inside the body. The way the energy was surging just now was as if it wanted to overturn the sky. It was simply too messy. However, Yun Nuoxing had succeeded. To the two of them, this was simply a ridiculous method. The former, however, did not think much of it. It was not the first time he had done this, and he had never failed. That kind of energy compression bit by bit was too much of a waste of time. Seeing the siblings whispering something, Yun Nuoxing shook his head helplessly. It had been more than half a day since he rescued them. Little Purple Soul was sleeping on his shoulder. The two of them had not recovered to their peak state, but their basic movements were not hindered. They could also support the barrier that was strong enough to withstand the energy tide with their demigod strength. Seeing that the two of them were in a hurry, Yun Nuoxing couldn't tell them to rest for a while. He hung them in a water bubble on his back and left the Een Lake. We can't be out for too long this time. Dad and Mom are keeping a close eye on us. Gu Chun scratched his head and said embarrassedly, after entering the Yin-Yang world, we were accidentally caught by those people from the Lingyun battle court. We wasted a lot of time fighting, so we don't have time to waste. Although we haven't recovered to our peak state, we can still protect ourselves even in the face of gods. Yun Nuoxing responded casually. He took the two of them and flew quickly through the energy tide. He looked around and said, "What does the thing you are looking for look like?" "The fruit of the flaming sun tree, on the yang side of the yin-yang world. It has the effect of nurturing and releasing potential. It can be used to refine a kind of peerless elixir. Even our family spent a lot of money to find out where this thing is in the yin-yang world. Brother Yun, if you help us find it, we can give you some," Gu Chun said with a smile. Fairy Gu looked at her stupid brother who couldn't keep his mouth shut and shook his head helplessly. Mei Mao looked at Yun Nuoxing casually, blinked, and said nothing. "Hey, you said it so bluntly. Aren't you afraid that I'll leave you and take it for myself?" Yun Nuoxing turned his head and smiled faintly, joking. Hearing this, Gu Chun shook his head calmly and said, "Brother Yun is our savior. If Brother Yun wants to take it for himself, we won't say anything. Just take it as a gift. It's just a small token of our respect." Seeing that his eyes were clear and didn't look like he was lying, Yun Nuoxing looked at him for a while and said faintly, "Well, I'm not that bad. After all, it's your information." Hearing this, Gu Chun smiled and gave his sister a thumbs up. He threw a look that said, "I knew Brother Yun wasn't that kind of person." Fairy Gu rolled her eyes in annoyance. Mei Mao looked at Yun Nuoxing with some light in her eyes. She wanted to say something, but she hesitated and didn't say anything. She could only sigh in her heart. This person looks like a girl. He shouldn't have any bad intentions. Yun Nuoxing didn't know what they were thinking. He helped them find the flaming sun tree just to pass the time. He had heard of the flaming sun fruit before. It could nurture one's potential. Something like potential would be used up one day. By then, if one didn't encounter any opportunities, it might be the same for the rest of one's life. There were some spiritual items in the world that had the miraculous effect of nurturing one's potential. The flaming sun fruit was one of the top ones. Moreover, the flaming sun fruit could maximize one's potential. It was extremely effective for experts at the beginner god level. Even if a high-level god ate it, it would have a good effect. "Well, although I know this thing," Yun Nuoxing murmured in his heart. Although the flaming sun fruit was good, he didn't care for it. He didn't lack this kind of item. Out of 10 fairy items that he had, 8 out of 10 of them were related to potential. It was just that their effects were different. Moreover, they were real fairy items. In terms of nurturing potential, they were more effective than elixirs made with thousands of medicinal herbs and flaming sun fruit. As for those fairy items that only had the effect of nurturing potential, they were even more exaggerated. Before being air-hatched, Yun Nuoxing had refined many of them and fused them into her egg. Yun Nuoxing quickly flew through the energy tide without looking around. His soul force was immersed in the void, constantly probing for places with dense yang energy. Although there was an extremely dense yang energy reaction in the surroundings, the flaming sun tree and flaming sun fruit were nurtured with yang energy, so they would condense more energy. Therefore, there should be a place with a high energy reaction, even if it was in the shallow layer of the energy tide. As his soul force spread towards a certain place, Yun Nuoxing suddenly sent back a message, causing him to turn his head and look at that place through the energy fog. His gaze became somewhat interesting, and he couldn't help but laugh. "What's wrong?" Gu Chun asked. "Nothing. I think I found the flaming sun tree you were talking about, but..." Yun Nuoxing's figure hovered in the air. his windbreaker flapping from his own energy. He pointed at a place and said, "There seems to be quite a few people gathered there, the shallow layer of the energy tide." Gu Chen and Fairy Gu's expressions froze, and they looked at each other in disbelief. Gu Chen couldn't help but ask, "Someone beat us to it? But wasn't that place said to be very dangerous, and no one went there?" Yun Nuoxing shrugged, indicating that he didn't know, but after a moment he asked, "When did you receive that message? About a year ago?" Gu Chen was puzzled. "Oh, the yin-yang sky opens once a year. Usually, the energy tide will completely cover the yin-yang sky, and it won't recede until this time every year. But every time it opens, the receding point and direction are different. Maybe the dangerous place this year won't be dangerous the next time it opens." Yun Nuoxing seemed to understand something. Gu Chen's eyes widened and Fairy Gu's red lips twitched. "That means the message has expired. Who told you not to use it while it was still fresh?" Yun Nuoxing looked at the two helplessly. This was the first time he had seen someone miss a good opportunity because the message had expired. How should he put it? He felt a little sympathetic. "It's not like we don't have a chance." Fairy Gu pondered for a while, then looked at Yun Nuoxing and said softly, "I don't remember what the message said after that, but it seems to mean that even if we know the place, it won't be that easy to get it. Probably a trial. I just saw it at Little Yang Lake, and there was a peak Son of God guardian. This place is probably the same," Yun Nuoxing said casually. "Peak Son of God." Gu Chen and Fairy Gu looked at each other and fell silent. A peak Son of God was a little tricky. Even if the two of them joined forces, it would take a lot of effort to defeat it. It would be fine if there was no one around, but if there were a lot of people gathered there, as Yun Nuoxing said, it would be troublesome. Someone might take advantage of their weakness to attack. Seeing the siblings' flickering eyes, Yun Nuoxing smiled faintly, waved his hand and said, "Anyway, let's go and take a look first." Fairy Gu and Gu Chen nodded. They could only go and take a look before making a decision. With Yun Nuoxing's speed, he brought the two of them to the place he had just sensed in a few minutes. What appeared in front of them was a mountain range. Yun Nuoxing was stunned. Wasn't this mountain range the Serpentine mountain range that separated the two regions? It was thousands of feet tall. Two kinds of rich energy converged in this mountain range, and there was a dragon vein underground that spewed out dragon's breath. The three kinds of energy converged here, forming a silvery white energy that spread throughout the entire mountain range like a burning flame. This mountain range should be very dangerous. It was even more dangerous than the energy tides on both sides of the mountain range. It was almost like the Yin Lake and the Yang Lake were flowing in reverse here. The energy collided crazily, and the monstrous energy flames burned fiercely. The dragon's breath was like a catalyst that made the Yin and Yang energies burn even more crazily. Even though it was just the energy form of a flame, one would feel an inexplicable burning sensation at a glance. Yun Nuoxing's eyes were sharp, and he soon found the place where many people were gathered. In a part of the mountain range, the energy flames were a little weak. It was close to the edge of the mountain range, and in the shallow region of the energy tides, the flames seemed to be suppressed, and a miraculous calm region appeared. On the mountain range in the calm region, there was a naturally formed platform. It was a little bumpy, and the gap between the left and right sides of the platform was about 10 meters. It was not just a slope. The silvery white flame surrounded the platform, and did not spread into it. In the middle of the platform there was a forest, a pale white forest and a fiery red forest. On this side of the mountain range there was a fiery red forest, and on the other side of the mountain range there was a pale white forest. There was a clear dividing line. On both sides of the platform there were two very spacious mountain paths and small platforms. They were obviously man-made. Many people gathered on the small platforms. The two spacious mountain paths extended from the small platforms to the forest at the top of the mountain. There were about 20 people gathered on the small platforms. Including the platform on the other side of the moon, there were about 50 people in total. These 50 people were all blocked in front of the mountain path. At the junction of the platform and the mountain path, there was a spear-like figure. The protector on the moon side was 2 meters tall. He wore a pale white metal armor that was extremely thick and heavy. He held a silver-white spear in his hand, and his entire body was suffused with a metallic luster. The protector on the sun side was about the same, but his armor was fiery red like the sun. It was very dazzling, and just looking at it made one's eyes heat up and feel irritated. So that's how it is. It's the brand of rule. These guardians are all experts who once appeared in the yin-yang world. Their strength is remembered by the rules of this special place. Once someone wants to enter those core areas, the rules of heaven and earth will transform into a guardian through the brand of rule to prevent those who are not strong enough from entering. Looking at the guardian, Yun Nuoshing suddenly realized that those guardians were formed by the spontaneous power of the rules of this world. Is it very powerful? Gu Chen asked quickly. It was their first time in the yin-yang world. They only came for the sun flame fruit, so they didn't know anything. Yun Nuoshing pondered for a while and said, "The brand of rule records the strength of the expert who once appeared here. How powerful the expert used to be is the limit of his strength. There will also be a corresponding guardian for the corresponding realm. You can use various methods to pass through. Well, if you are stronger than the guardian, you can directly push through. Anyway, let's go down first. It seems that we can't pass through from the sky." Yun Nuoshing hugged Little Purple Soul in his arms and said to the two of them. Then, he quickly fell down. The rapid sound of rushing wind caused everyone on the platform to be startled. Numerous gazes swept across the surroundings, and soon after, they saw Yun Nuoshing and the other two descend like divine soldiers from the heavens. Those gazes were all shocked. Quite a number of people here had entered the Water Cloud Pavilion before, and naturally knew of Yun Nuoshing. However, they did not know of the two people behind him, and did not pay too much attention to them. After all, they were only 3 demigods. This was also because they didn't know what happened at Little Yang Lake. If they knew, no one would think so. Yun Nuoshing was too lazy to care about what everyone was thinking. At this moment, the fiery red guardian was fighting with someone. If not, he would have rushed up long ago. He did not like to wait for too long. He would wake up after spending a little time to see the situation clearly. It would be a waste of time to continue waiting, especially when there were so many people around. The 3 of them glanced around. Yun Nuoshing was bored, while Ancient Fairy and her brother were looking at these people who might be their opponents and paying more attention. There are many people worthy of your attention. Well, to me, they are not a threat at all. Yun Nuoshing faintly transmitted his voice to the 2 of them and pointed at the person standing in front with his eyes. That was a divine venerable expert, and he was very close to becoming a divine king. Ancient Fairy and her brother smiled bitterly. Yun Nuoshing said again, "When this person is done fighting, we will go up. Just follow behind me. Don't get too close or you will be affected by my attack." "Well, I will try my best to control it. I just want to remind you." The 2 of them smiled bitterly again. The guardian didn't look so simple. The 2 of them hadn't recovered to their peak state at this time, so it would be difficult for them to defeat him. Bang! While the 3 of them were talking, a dull sound came from the platform. Then, everyone saw a figure spitting out blood and flying backward. Yun Nuoshing's eyes glanced at the person until he fell to the ground. He looked at the person who was covered in blood and was deep in thought. That person was a 4th transformation divine son, while the guardian was close to the divine venerable level. There was about a difference of 4 or 5 small realms. After thinking for a while, Yun Nuoshing suddenly came back to his senses and quickly waved his hand to bring Ancient Fairy and her brother up. However, the divine venerable expert directly stepped forward and entered the guardian's attack range. Yun Nuoshing's face twitched and he smiled bitterly. Anyway, he was late. Line up, line up. When the divine venerable expert stepped forward, many people here became alert. In fact, many of them had already been eliminated. It was just that Yun Nuoshing hadn't come at that time, so they didn't know. When the divine venerable expert walked in front of the guardian, the red figure who was originally a 8th transformation divine son had a strong light in his eyes. His aura suddenly surged, and in a few breaths, he surpassed the divine venerable expert. Moreover, he steadily surpassed the divine venerable expert by a few small realms before stopping. The divine venerable expert couldn't help but smile bitterly when he saw such an aura. People who weren't good at fighting beyond their realms wouldn't be able to pass this stage. However, he had already walked out, so he could only brace himself and face it. Boom! When the divine venerable expert was ready, the guardian's eyes lit up. He stomped his feet on the ground, and his huge body rushed straight in front of the divine venerable expert. A fist the size of a cattail hassock smashed down with terrifying aura and yang energy. That speed made the divine venerable expert's expression freeze. He had been observing for a long time, but when it was his turn, the guardian's strength had increased by a few notches. It wasn't as simple as he had seen before, and the battle he had observed earlier was no longer of any value. The divine venerable expert roared. Since there was no trick, he would meet force with force. He didn't choose to dodge. Instead, he gathered his aura and punched out, colliding with the guardian's ferocious attack. Boom! Another loud sound was heard. A weak energy storm erupted from the two disproportionate fists and swept out. Then, everyone saw the divine venerable expert's face turn pale as he was sent flying. He spat out mouthfuls of blood before finally landing heavily on the ground with a pale face. All right, let's go. Yun Nuoshing wasn't surprised to see the divine venerable expert defeated in one blow. She tilted her head and smiled at the ancient fairy duo, then walked straight towards the guardian. Before the siblings could react, they saw Yun Nuoshing already in front of the guardian. Their faces turned bitter, but waiting was not a solution. They could only grit their teeth and quickly followed. Chapter 948. As Yun Nuoshing stepped into the guardian's attack range, the red figure slowly raised its head. Its crimson eyes flashed as it glanced at Yun Nuoshing, then looked at the two fairy Guchun and Guchun. After a while, its godly king-level aura dropped rapidly. Within a few breaths, it had dropped to the level of Son of God. It was probably around the Son of God's 7th transformation, which was stronger than Yun Nuoshing had expected. Perhaps it was because it had two people with it. Brother Yun, is this really okay? Why don't you wait for us to recover? Gu Chen looked at the guardian's crimson eyes and felt his scalp go numb. Yun Nuoshing smiled faintly, indicating that there was no need to worry. Then, under the watchful eyes of the crowd, he walked to a place less than 10 meters away from the guardian. This distance was close enough for a god master to touch his face. His attack could instantly cross this distance and reach the enemy's face. Bang! The moment he approached, the red figure suddenly disappeared, and a crater appeared where it had been. Not even an afterimage could be seen in the space. With just a flash, Yun Nuoshing felt a strong gust of wind blowing at his face, causing his long hair and windbreaker to flutter. In the next moment, he saw the huge figure swinging its fist at him. The strong gust of wind contained in the fist caused the space to tremble slightly. Yun Nuoshing's eyes were strengthened by the evil spirit eye and the eye of the ocean. He could even barely capture objects moving at the speed of light. This speed could be seen as slow motion. Therefore, the moment the fist appeared, his right thumb and middle finger quickly stuck together, and then he rubbed them gently. Ta! Ka! A crisp snap of a finger caused a faint ripple to appear in the space. The sound that followed was the sound of the entire space freezing into a piece. In this place where the yang energy was vigorous and hot, a beautiful ice sculpture suddenly appeared on the spot. It was like an ice sculpture. The black ice sculpture bloomed 1/2 meter in front of Yun Nuoshing, freezing the Red Guardian together with it. Everything suddenly quieted down, and everyone gasped. No one saw how Yun Nuoshing attacked. Even when they felt the energy fluctuation, the attack had already taken shape. No, it had already ended. There's nothing that can't be solved with a snap of the fingers. Yun Nuoshing tilted his head and smiled faintly at the ancient fairy and her brother, who were dumbfounded. The light element was so abnormal, especially when it was integrated into the performance of other mysterious technique. The enemy could only feel that all his attacks were instantaneous, catching them off guard and impossible to defend against. Seeing that the Guardian had been frozen inside, Yun Nuoshing waved his hand to beckon the ancient fairy and her brother, and then he walked forward. The people on the platform behind him had strange looks on their faces. No one had ever passed through this checkpoint before. Those who were gathered here were all experts of the younger generation of the Kuan-Yuan region. Even they couldn't pass through it. Moreover, when they saw that others couldn't pass through it, they felt relieved. However, when they saw that someone had led 2 other people to pass through it easily, their gazes became strange. Could it be that it was actually very simple? Crack, when Yun Nuoshing led the ancient fairy and her brother out for a distance and was about to ascend the mountain path, a soft sound suddenly came from behind them, causing them to prick up their ears. This sound was like the sound of ice shattering, as if something was about to break out of the ice. Bang! The sudden explosion of the ice cube caused a large amount of cold air to erupt on the spot. Black energy was exposed in the air. A bright red figure skillfully crossed through the air. His body was pulled into an afterimage, which was blurry. His aura had also soared by a few times within a breath's time. His strength had also leaped by a few levels. The breaking of the mysterious darkness ice caused Yun Nuoshing's expression to become sluggish. He abruptly turned his head around and saw the enormous figure cutting through the sound barrier like a cannonball as it rushed towards him. The long spear in his hand surged with a hot fiery red energy. From a great distance away, the long spear was shot out. A bright red flame was like a spear wind as it carried an extremely hot energy as it rushed over. "Brother Yun, be careful!" Gu Chen turned pale with fright and hurriedly shouted. A black light flashed across Yun Nuoshing's eyes. The speed of the fiery red spear was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, it had rushed in front of him and released an incomparably blazing energy towards him. Dark, mysterious ice. He let out a low shout and his right hand snapped again. This time, it was not an ice sculpture that suddenly appeared. Everyone only felt that time seemed to slow down several times in their line of sight. The speed of the fiery red spear that was rapidly flashing suddenly slowed down, and its movement was visible to the naked eye. Then, an energy wave surged out from Yun Nuoshing's body. When the fiery red spear came into contact with the extremely cold energy wave, it suddenly trembled. Then, a wisp of black cold light appeared from the tip of the spear and gradually moved towards its body. Under everyone's gaze, the fiery red spear slowly froze and turned into an energy ice sculpture. The Scarlet Guardian that swung the spear still had a stern expression on its face, but the extremely cold energy that followed the spear had already touched its spear and turned it into ice. Then, the extremely cold energy continued to move up the spear and froze its right hand, followed by its body. The energy that spread out from its body gradually froze the space, as though the ice was spreading out from its body. In the end, its entire figure was swallowed by the ice and disappeared into the pitch-black ice. Even its energy was annihilated. Crack! The sound of ice freezing was heard as expected, and the slow-motion scene returned to normal in an instant. The whole process was definitely shorter than half a second. In an instant, everyone saw a huge ice sculpture in front of Yun Nuoshing, less than 3 villages away. The ice sculpture seemed to be pointing a spear at her. The biting cold made everyone shiver. Her eyes gradually became calm. Yun Nuoxing heaved a sigh of relief, turned around, and walked away. She snapped her fingers and said with a smile, "If one time isn't enough, let's do it twice." Both fairy and fairy heaved a sigh of relief. Everything happened too quickly, and they couldn't react at all. By the time they were about to make a move, the spear was already close to Yun Nuoxing. Fortunately, the latter's strength was far beyond their imagination. It seemed like they were worried for nothing. Now that there shouldn't be any obstruction, the three of them stepped onto the mountain path calmly. Halfway through, Yun Nuoxing suddenly turned her head with a strange expression. She stared at the black ice sculpture and said, "Did we really pass it this time? Don't tell me it came back to life?" Both fairy and fairy were stunned. They also turned around and looked at the ice sculpture. They looked at it vigilantly for a while, then pulled Yun Nuoxing back carefully. Their movements were somewhat comical. They were very careful and retreated step by step. Their eyes were fixed on the black ice sculpture, as if they were afraid that the thing inside would suddenly appear and attack them. However, they had already been ambushed once, so it was fine to be careful. Fortunately, until Yun Nuoxing and the others reached the end of the mountain path and stepped onto the platform at the top of the mountain, the ice sculpture didn't move at all. When Yun Nuoxing, who was walking behind them, stepped onto the platform, the ice sculpture suddenly shattered. Then, under everyone's bitter gazes, it turned around and faced the people on the small platform. It stomped the ground with its spear, and the mountain shook. The force made everyone tremble. Seeing that everything was fine, the three of them heaved a sigh of relief. Then, they turned around and saw the flaming yang trees in front of them. Their eyes lit up. Gu Chen was so excited that he jumped up and said, "Flaming yang trees? Flaming yang fruit. Hee, we finally got to see them. Wow, the fruits here are so fragrant. They should be delicious. Brother, go and pick some. Go and pick some." Little Purple Soul woke up just in time. As soon as she woke up, she saw the fiery red forest and the huge fruits hanging under the trees. She immediately raised her eyebrows, and her gem-like eyes flashed. She quickly pulled Yun Nuoxing's head with both hands. Yun Nuoxing let out a bitter laugh and nodded. Before the girl could pull his head off, he quickly ran to a tree and jumped up to grab the fiery red fruit. Just as he was about to use his strength to gently pluck it, his expression changed. With his weak strength, he could not pluck the fruit. When he touched it, it was as if he had grabbed a ball of fire. Yun Nuoxing was stunned for a moment. The temperature was nothing to him. He frowned and let out a soft groan. He pulled hard, and the fruit that was half the size of a fist fell to the ground. After plucking the fruit, he felt that his energy seemed to have decreased a little. So that's how it is. Yun Nuoxing suddenly realized that it wasn't the kind that could be plucked at will. There were some restrictions. What happened next would depend on how much energy he had left. However, he wasn't worried about that at all. Little Purple Soul happily took the flaming sun fruit from Yun Nuoxing's shoulder. The hot temperature didn't affect her at all. She held the fruit in her hand and looked at it for a while. Then, she opened her mouth and took a small bite. "Wait, Brother Yun!" Gu Chen gasped when he saw Little Purple Soul taking a bite of the fruit without hesitation. He was sad that the flaming sun fruit was eaten so easily, but he was also shocked that she dared to take a bite of the flaming sun fruit. The temperature of the fruit was equivalent to the fire elemental energy condensed by some supreme gods and godly kings. However, just as he shouted, he saw Little Purple Soul chewing the fruit gently. After a while, she swallowed it. Her little face lit up with joy, and her little legs that were resting on Yun Nuoxing's shoulder couldn't help but shake. The fairy Gu was relatively calm. She looked at Little Purple Soul for a while. She didn't find anything strange about her, so she said, "It seems that this little girl isn't an ordinary person either." Yun Nuoxing nodded and stretched out his hand to stroke this girl's head. He said, "This girl is a little mysterious. She seems to have absolute disregard for low-level energy. Well, I discovered it by accident. It seems that even God Underworld's strong practitioners can't hurt her at all. When the energy of gods and deities acts on her body, no matter if it's positive or negative, the effect is extremely low. Even if it's a God Emperor's strong practitioner, it's not that easy to affect her. This was the result of his research after staying in the Nine Gods Temple for a while. He originally wanted to cleanse Little Purple Soul's marrow and refine her little body, but he didn't expect that ordinary medicine would be almost useless. The power of the fairy in her soul seemed to block most of the energy that acted on her, no matter if it was positive or negative. Only when Yun Nuoxing threw out a fairy item could it be effective. However, it didn't seem obvious. The Golden Empress had also tried it herself. Her power could only affect Little Purple Soul to a very limited extent. Combined with the fact that this little girl hadn't grown up for more than 10 years and still had the temperament of a child, everyone had a very scary guess in their hearts. Of course, some of their guesses were very unreliable. Anyway, this little girl was very mysterious. She was even more mysterious than Yun Nuoxing. At least everyone knew about the things on Yun Nuoxing's body. These things could be pointed out and explained. However, Little Purple Soul's body was even more mysterious than Little Purple Soul. Even Temple Master Guang couldn't understand it. Ning Qianxue couldn't understand it either. In the end, she could only give up. Then, she came up with an immunity property. The immunity included both positive and negative effect. No one knew if it was good or bad. Perhaps it was because of this property that Little Purple Soul's soul was tainted with fairy qi. Well, let's not talk about this. Yun Nuoxing shook her head when she saw the two people's curious and doubtful gazes. She looked at Little Purple Soul, who was talking about her, and let out a sigh of relief. She said, "You need energy to harvest the sun fruit. Try to harvest as much as you can." Gu Chun came back to his senses and remembered why he came here. He quickly nodded and thanked Yun Nuoxing. Then, he pulled the fairy Gu and rushed out. "Brother, brother!" Little Purple Soul called out softly. She passed the half-eaten sun fruit to Yun Nuoxing. She licked the juice on the corner of her mouth and smiled innocently. "What's wrong? Doesn't it taste good?" Yun Nuoxing took the fruit and asked with her head tilted. Little Purple Soul shook her head and said, "No, it's quite good. It's much better than the one I had yesterday. I want to leave some for brother." Yun Nuoxing was stunned for a moment. Then, she smiled and felt warmth in her heart. She rubbed the little girl's long purple hair and passed the sun fruit to her. She smiled and said, "Eat it. There's more here. I'll pick some more. Eat as much as you like." Little Purple Soul nodded happily. Then, she hugged the sun fruit and took small bite. Yun Nuoxing looked at the sun trees nearby. She pondered for a moment but did not pick any. Instead, she used her soul perception to find a few sun trees that looked very healthy. Then, she plucked all the fruits on them. There were about 15 of them. There are so many sun trees in this place. I wonder how long they have been here. Yun Nuoxing's eyes sparkled as he looked at the sun fruits he plucked. Some of the sun fruits here were at least 10,000 years old. Even if this place was developed fairly, very few people could set foot here. Even if they did, it would take a lot of energy to pluck one sun fruit. She guessed that no one could harvest many. Someone like her who still had a lot of energy after plucking 15 sun fruits was an anomaly. Yun Nuoxing clenched his fist. He still had a lot of energy left. Plucking 15 sun fruits had only used 1/10 of his energy. However, his energy capacity was many times more than the others. It was actually quite scary. It would be good if a normal person could pluck 2 or 3 sun fruit. The two areas seemed to be connected. Looking past the rows of sun trees, Yi Shiwen saw a pale white forest in the distance. That should be the sun tree's counterpart, the sun tree. The sun fruit had the same effect as the sun fruit. The only difference was that one carried yang energy, while the other carried yin energy. They were suitable for different people. Yun Nuoshing took a few steps and arrived at the sun tree. He could clearly feel that the energy in the surroundings had changed. Looking around, there was no one here. He could vaguely hear a feminine voice coming from the small platform on the other side. There were also sounds of energy colliding. However, it seemed that no one could break in. After carefully looking around for a while, Yun Nuoshing used his hand to poke at a nearby sun tree. After confirming that there was no problem, he let out a sigh of relief. Looking around, he released his soul power and picked a few stronger sun trees. After plucking all the fruits, he clapped his hands and picked a big one for Little Purple Soul. Little Purple Soul, who had just finished eating the flaming sun fruit, saw this pale white fruit and its eyes lit up. It let out a happy laugh and opened its mouth to take a bite of the flaming sun fruit. If other people saw this, they would probably be heartbroken. The sun fruit and sun fruit were both precious treasures that could be used to refine medicine. The pills refined from them would be at least of the highest quality. Yet, they were crunching and chewing. However, Yun Nuoshing didn't care at all. Well, if there are two areas, then theoretically, that thing should exist. After keeping the mysterious yin fruit, Yun Nuoshing clapped his hands and could not help but chuckle softly. He muttered to himself, before turning his gaze towards the intersection between the two areas. With a flash, he appeared at the intersection. The thing that he was talking about was the strange tree where yin and yang intersected. Because it was too special and was cultivated by two completely opposite energies, it was too unbelievable. Many people doubted its existence and there was a lot of debate. Therefore, even if this theory was very magical, it wasn't listed on the Treasure of Heaven and Earth ranking. After all, no one had seen it before and couldn't fully understand its existence. Walking on the border with some anticipation, with a pale world on his left and a fiery red ocean on his right, Yun Nuoshing also seemed to be divided into two halves. The color of this place was perfectly divided into two colors. When he walked on the border, he was also dyed in two colors. It was very strange. However, this kind of thing was actually quite dangerous because the two opposing energies had indeed landed on his body. There was no guarantee that they wouldn't react inexplicably upon contact. Only a skilled person like Yun Nuoshing dared to do this. Found it. After walking with his eyes closed for a while, Yun Nuoshing suddenly opened his eyes and smiled. This wasn't the first time he saw this thing, but seeing it again made him feel a little emotional. What appeared in front of him was an open space. The sun fruit and the profound yin tree were some distance away from this open space. In the center of this open space there was a tree about 3 feet tall. Compared to the trees on both sides, this tree seemed a little small. However, there was nothing around it, but it stood out very conspicuously. The whole tree was dyed in two colors. The pale white and the fiery red flowed on the tree like a flowing liquid. They weren't separated from the middle, but the two colors were perfectly blended together. Stopping 10 meters away from the tree, Yun Nuoshing lowered his head and shifted his gaze away from the tree. The reason why he suddenly stopped was not because he was worried about anything, but because there was a beautiful figure under the tree. Someone had arrived before him. It was a tall figure. Her silk-like hair fluttered in the wind, hanging down to her waist. There was a charm to her body that blended into the world, as if she had become one with nature. The bluish-white robe wasn't luxurious and was a little plain, but it didn't reduce her charm. Even though he could only see her back, Yun Nuoshing could feel that this person should be a rare beauty. However, he didn't feel anything. Compared to her appearance, he was more interested in her aura. A divine underworld powerhouse. Yun Nuoshing was a little surprised when he saw through the strength of the beautiful figure in front of him. He didn't know if this person was the divine underworld powerhouse he sensed in the water cloud pavilion. To be able to come here, she clearly had some strength. He didn't believe that the two law marks couldn't even deal with a divine underworld powerhouse. This person shouldn't be a powerhouse of the younger generation. The first emperor of War of Kuan Yuan was a fourth transformation divine emperor. Counting the time of the seal, she shouldn't be. Yun Nuoshing muttered in his heart, but before he could finish, he was stunned. He remembered that he had seen a divine underworld powerhouse who wasn't even 200 years old. It seemed like he couldn't jump to conclusions so easily. While he was sizing up the beautiful figure, the person who stopped under the strange tree and seemed to be in a daze also sensed the movement behind her. She gently turned around, revealing the right side of her beautiful face. Exquisite, beautiful, and elegant. This was Yun Nuoshing's first impression. The side of her white face was suffused with some luster, and it was faintly red under the light of the yang energy. Those watery eyes looked straight at him, but then she was stunned. Her slender eyebrows and tall nose wrinkled, and a beautiful voice that contained some astonishment softly sounded. Demigod rank? Just like how Yun Nuoshing was astonished by her aura, she was also astonished that he, who appeared here, was actually only a demigod rank. Chapter 949. In a world of ice and fire, there was a strange tree that was white and crimson in color. As the wind blew, the leaves on the tree made a strange tinkling sound. It sounded like the crisp sound of metal clanking against metal. The girl under the tree and the boy who looked like a girl stared at each other for a long time. The little girl in the boy's arms also looked up quietly. The wind ruffled their robes and hair. The three of them stared at each other for a long time without saying a word. It was a peaceful and beautiful scene. Yo! The moment Yun Nuoshing raised his hand to greet her, the scene collapsed. The girl's face stiffened. She looked at him strangely. Her strange gaze moved back and forth on his face, but her attention was obviously not on him. She was only curiously sizing up this strange intruder. After a while, she looked away and looked at the strange tree again, as if she was waiting for something. Yun Nuoshing felt a little awkward after being ignored. He scratched the back of his head and moved to the side. He walked around in a big circle and stopped on the other side of the strange tree. He also looked up at the strange tree. As for the girl, she kept looking at the strange tree and ignored him. Perhaps to her, a demigod was not worthy of her attention. Similarly, Yun Nuoshing was too lazy to go closer. Otherwise, he would not have walked around to look at the side of the strange tree. This strange tree contained both yang and yin energy. In other words, it was an amalgamation of the two types of energy. However, it did not simply store the two types of energy. It also integrated the two types of energy into its body. That was why its branches and leaves were so colorful. However, this tree did not bear any fruit. Ah, this beautiful tree doesn't bear any fruits. Little Purple Soul sat on Yun Nuoshing's shoulder and looked at the tree with only leaves. She could not help but grumble. She thought there would be fruits. Yun Nuoshing smiled faintly. He raised his head and scratched the little girl's nose. He said, "When I first saw it, I thought the same as you. I thought it would not bear any fruit. Well, in fact, there isn't any." Yun Nuoshing let out a light breath and turned his gaze to the strange tree. This tree won't produce any fruits. The two completely repulsive energies have fused into the tree. It's already a miracle that it can maintain itself and stabilize the two energies. Well, it's just that it won't produce any fruit. He didn't think that the godly dark elite would hear what he was whispering to the little Purple Soul. The latter couldn't help but laugh. It was a very light laugh without any warmth. It was just like a sneer. Yun Nuoshing saw her sneer and blushed. He was a little embarrassed. He knew that the divine underworld expert did not believe him. After all, he was only a demigod. If the words were said by an emperor god expert, she would probably believe him. However, it did not matter whether she believed him or not. He could not be bothered to care. He scratched his cheek and did not say anything. Well, it seems like she doesn't know either. Yun Nuoshing grumbled in his heart. The divine underworld expert stared at the leaves above her. He did not know if she was waiting or what. The fruits did not appear by waiting. However, he was too lazy to remind her or say anything. Although he did not mind the sneer, it was fine if she did not believe him. Let's wait until she leaves to avoid any trouble. Yun Nuoshing sighed in his heart and shook his head. He should be more careful when he was weak. They waited quietly for a long time. Little Purple Soul struggled a few times and wanted to jump down from his shoulder. However, there was a divine underworld expert here. Yun Nuoshing was cautious and did not let her go like he usually did. He held her in his arms and saw her puffing up her cheeks and punching his chest with her little fists. He could not help but laugh. He stretched out a finger to tease the little girl. Another half an hour passed in the blink of an eye. In this half an hour, no one else stepped onto this platform. The sounds of fighting on the two small platforms also quieted down. It seemed like no one else could set foot on this place. He did not know how the ancient fairy siblings were doing. Based on their recovered state, they might be able to take 4 or 5 fruit. Why aren't you leaving yet? Yun Nuoshing couldn't stand it any longer. In this short period of time, less than an hour had passed, and the divine underworld expert was still standing there. His patience had also been worn down a little, and he couldn't help but mutter in his heart, "Hurry up and leave, hurry up and leave, why aren't you leaving yet?" He did not know if it was the effect of his grumbling, but the divine underworld expert suddenly sighed. He lowered his head and muttered, "It seems like there's no hope this year." Yun Nuoshing could not help but laugh when he heard this. So this divine underworld expert came every year just to wait for that strange tree to bear fruit? He had already said that this tree would not bear fruit. After the divine underworld expert sighed, he glanced at Yun Nuoshing, who was still pretending to be stubborn. He frowned but did not say anything. He turned around and walked towards the dark side. It seemed like he had given up. Seeing that he was finally willing to leave, Yun Nuoshing also heaved a sigh of relief. He glanced at the divine underworld expert and stared at the divine underworld expert until she disappeared into the forest. He waited for a few more minutes, and even used his soul energy to scan the surroundings suspiciously. In these two forests, he only sensed the ancient fairy siblings. The divine underworld expert could no longer sense them. He then exhaled heavily and placed Little Purple Soul on his shoulder. He smiled and said, "Wait a moment. Big Brother will make you something good to eat." Little Purple Soul had almost fallen asleep from waiting. When she heard that there was something good to eat, her eyes shone brightly. She quickly nodded her little head and asked, "What's good to eat? What's good to eat?" Yun Nuoshing chuckled. He took out the arcane een fruit and blazing sun fruit from his pendant and carefully looked around. When he made sure that there was no one else around, he lightly stepped on the ground and floated in front of a tree branch. He looked around and found a branch. He tied the arcane een fruit and blazing sun fruit to the branch. He then plucked a red and pale leaf and placed it on top of the 2 fruit. After that, he lightly floated back a distance. Little Purple Soul's eyes widened in curiosity. The 2 fruits hung on the branch and were covered by a palm-sized leaf. The little girl scratched her head in confusion. She lowered her head and saw her brother's happy face. She could only grumble and pull his long hair back and forth. A moment later, the 2 fruits that were tied to the same branch slowly brightened. The leaf also emitted a bright light. Little Purple Soul quickly stared at it. When the leaf and the 2 fruits gradually brightened to a certain degree, they suddenly trembled and turned into a puddle of liquid. The 3 fruits then quickly merged together. The little girl could not help but cry out in surprise. "This tree won't bear any fruit. It only has one use." Yun Nuoshing pointed at the rapidly merging light and said, "That is, fuse the 2 fruits together and turn them into a fruit that contains 2 types of energy." Well, this fusion is not just a simple fusion. The new fruit will have a medicinal effect that is 10 times stronger than the original 2 fruits combined. It will also have some additional uses. For example, the blazing sun fruit alone can be used to concoct a low-level ultimate-grade medicinal pill with a few thousand herbs. However, it is not the main ingredient. However, when the blazing sun fruit and the arcane fruit fuse into a fruit, the fruit can be used as the main ingredient in a high-level ultimate-grade medicinal pill. Although I don't really understand. Little Purple Soul scratched her long hair in distress. Then, she smiled happily and said, "But my brother is so awesome." Of course. Yun Nuoshing grinned proudly and raised his head with all his might. He stretched his neck and said, "I'm your brother." In his opinion, the existence of this strange tree in this place was also very powerful. Although the Yin-Yang world was a large Yin-Yang world, it was not surprising that it would form such a place to nurture heavenly materials and earthly treasures. However, it was really incredible that there was such a forest and such a strange tree in such a small and calm area. According to his thinking, since such a strange tree could be nurtured, then logically speaking, the fire of the sun and the fire of the sun should also appear in the Shao Yin and Shao Yang. However, they did not. These two divine flames were not in this Yin-Yang world, but this strange tree appeared, which made Yun Nuoshing have to say that it was a little interesting. When the ball of light dissipated, a pale and crimson fruit was hanging on the branch. Its color seemed to be flowing. Compared to the previous two fruits, it was smaller, only the size of a fist. However, the energy contained in it had been raised by several levels, or even dozens of levels. Wow! Hearing Little Purple Soul's cheers, Yun Nuoshing smiled. He moved closer and plucked the fruit. During the process, he could feel that his energy had decreased by 1/10. He was shocked. He didn't expect to need so much energy to pluck the fruit again. Well, I still have energy talismans. Let's make a few more. Yun Nuoshing touched his forehead and nodded. He placed the fruit in Little Purple Soul's hand. Hearing the little girl's laughter, he grinned again. He quickly took out the other fruits and tied them to the nearby branches. He also plucked a few leaves and placed them on the other two fruit. Light appeared again and again. The brightest light was as bright as the sun. Yun Nuoshing squinted his eyes. He picked the biggest sun flame fruit and dark Yin fruit and hung them on the branch. It seemed that the new fruit had something to do with the ripeness of the original two fruit. When the light dissipated, Yun Nuoshing quickly moved closer and plucked the fruits one by one. The energy in his body was depleting rapidly. When it reached its limit, he quickly blew up the energy talismans engraved in his soul to replenish the energy that was almost depleted. Those energy talismans were made when he was in the second seal of the magic rank. They were just enough to replenish his energy. However, he was now a demigod. His energy carrier had undergone a drastic change due to the changes in the element. One energy talisman was no longer of much use. 20 energy talismans and I've only replenished 1/3 of my energy. Looks like I have to remake them. Yun Nuoshing muttered and sighed helplessly. The talismans that he made in the past were useless now. When he finished plucking all the fruits, he was still holding a small one in his hand, intending to taste it himself. However, he suddenly shuddered. When he turned around, he saw that there was an extra person under the tree. That person's eyes were filled with unconcealable emotions as they stared at him. There was astonishment, confusion, and a bit of joy. Yun Nuoshing was slightly stunned. This person was the divine underworld elite who had just left. He didn't know when she came back. He was so focused on plucking the fruits that he forgot to take precautions. He didn't notice that she had come back. Now, it seemed like she had seen everything? Little Purple Soul also cried out in surprise. Holding the half-eaten fruit in his hand, he was as stunned as Yun Nuoshing. He didn't know what to do. Moreover, Yun Nuoshing was even more shocked. He sensed that the divine underworld elite's aura had changed. In his senses, the woman was no longer a divine underworld elite. Instead, she had jumped straight to the level of the emperor of the underworld. There seemed to be some fluctuations in her aura, rising and falling like the tide. When it was at its lowest, it was only at the level of a heavenly god. However, when it reached its peak, it was beyond what he could see. In other words, she had reached the level of an emperor of the gods. F***ck, I've never seen such a strange situation in my life. Yun Nuoshing also widened his eyes in shock. He had never seen anyone's aura fluctuate to such an extent. Due to certain physical factors, he had seen people's aura fluctuate within a realm. However, the extent of fluctuation of this woman's aura had crossed 4 realms. What kind of situation was this? How could her body withstand such turbulent energy? It was probably made of 12th-level godly materials, right? Even his godly body couldn't withstand this strange energy fluctuation. At this moment, Yun Nuoshing quickly calmed down. He was a little stunned when he saw her looking at him with such a fluctuating state of mind. However, when he saw that she was indifferent and only stared at him with Mei Mao, the 2-colored fruit in his hand, he was also a little confused. After thinking for a while, he quickly turned to the side and took out the 2 fruits in front of her. Then, he repeated what he had just done. He plucked the fruit again and looked at her. The strange woman's expression froze. She looked at the forest on both sides thoughtfully. Finally, she looked at Yun Nuoshing questioningly and tilted her head. 2 fruits and 1 leaf. You can get what you want by hanging them on the same branch, Yun Nuoshing said with a kind smile as he waved the 2-colored fruit in his hand. After saying that, he landed on the ground. While the woman was still in a daze, he quietly retreated. Just as he was about to retreat into the forest on the sunny side, the woman finally came back to her senses. Her tall and slender body suddenly straightened. She turned to Yun Nuoshing and bowed deeply. "Thank you." Yun Nuoshing was stunned. When he saw the faint smile on the woman's beautiful face, he also smiled back. He waved his hand and turned to walk into the forest. Sensing that the strange woman seemed to be busy, Yun Nuoshing wasn't in a hurry to leave. He took out a 2-colored fruit and took a leisurely bite. Then, he plucked some leaves from the flaming sun tree. Although these leaves couldn't fuse the 2 fruits like the strange tree, they had a miraculous effect when used to make tea. Just like the soul crystals from the soul crystal tree, the leaves from trees that contain spirituality and powerful energy mostly had the same effect. However, it was a bit of a waste to use the leaves of the Glory's Will tree to make tea. Yun Nuoshing recovered a bit after collecting a lot of things along the way. He plucked a few more flaming sunfruit. After thinking about it, he felt that his OCD was acting up. He ran to the profound een tree and plucked the same number of profound een fruits before running back. When he finished his work and arrived at the entrance of the flaming sun forest, Fairy Gu and Gu Chun had already been waiting there for a while. "Brother Yun." Seeing Yun Nuoshing come out, Gu Chun excitedly jumped up from the ground and cupped his hands. Fairy Gu also cupped her hands with a smile. You didn't go to the profound een tree?" Yun Nuoshing was surprised to see that Fairy Gu was also here. "Profound een tree? Is it the opposite side?" Fairy Gu was surprised. Yun Nuoshing nodded and pointed inside. "The 2 places are connected. I thought you... Oh, since you also came up from here, it shouldn't be a problem for you to find the flaming sun fruit." Hearing this, the siblings both laughed bitterly. Gu Xianling stroked the black hair in front of her forehead and said, "I originally thought that I wouldn't be able to go over, but you're right. Because of my cultivation, I do need this flaming sun fruit. This is the first time I've seen how hard it is to pluck fruits." Gu Chen also smiled bitterly. "The 2 of us only plucked 5 and we're already exhausted. It'll probably take a long time to recover before we can pluck them again. But there's not much time left. Brother Yun, how's your harvest?" "I've plucked a dozen," Yun Nuoshing said casually. This number didn't include the profound een fruit, the ones that were used, and the ones that were eaten by little Z. So, he should have plucked about 30 of each. Fairy Gu and Gu Chen were speechless. This guy was indeed abnormal and different from ordinary people. They could tell that this guy was a little powerful from the fact that he could kill the Guardian in seconds. But they didn't expect him to be this powerful. We're going out. Brother Yun, what's your plan? Gu Chen asked. Yun Nuoxing's eyes suddenly turned blue. He looked into the distance, but he couldn't see where Xian and the others were cultivating. After a while, he withdrew his gaze and said, I have nothing to do. My friends are cultivating in the Yin-Yang world and looking for something to do. I'll send you out. Okay. I don't know if the people of the Lingyun battle court have left. It's more or less dangerous for us in our current state. We'll have to trouble Brother Yun. Gu Chen cupped his hands. Fairy Gu nodded and thanked him. Yun Nuoxing waved his hand. Anyway, I have nothing to do. He waved his hand and wrapped the two in a bubble. Yun Nuoxing tapped the ground with the tip of his foot and flew into the air. He turned into a stream of light and flew out of the Yin-Yang world. He used a little light element and was not afraid of being discovered by the two. There are other places in the Yin-Yang world. Are you sure you don't want to take a look? Yun Nuoxing tilted his head and said. Hearing this, Gu Chen shook his head with a smile and said, Thank you for your kindness, Brother Yun. But we didn't come out for a long time. We just came to the Yin-Yang world to take a look. Besides, there's also the matter of the Lingyun battle court. We have to go back and report it. In the past, they wouldn't attack us, people with low realms. We have to go back and tell them to be on guard. Yun Nuoxing nodded and didn't ask them to stay. He asked again, Did you see any fun places? The brother and sister smiled bitterly and shook their heads. Yun Nuoxing could only spread his hands helplessly. It seemed that he had to find a way to pass the time himself. He rushed all the way to the nearest exit with the two. 10 minutes later, he came out of the Yin-Yang world. He looked around and rushed in the direction of the Water Cloud City. There is a portal in the Water Cloud City. Is it okay to leave you there? And there will be no problem once we enter the city. There are many guards in the Water Cloud City. They won't dare to mess around in the city. Gu Chen responded loudly. Yun Nuoxing nodded and sped up again. If Gu Xianling and Gu Xianling were paying attention, they would be able to see bits of brilliant golden light flashing across the space. However, they seemed to be whispering about something and did not notice this. Not long after, they returned to Water Cloud City. They even deliberately stopped at the teleportation gate area and released the siblings from the water bubble. Brother Yun, thank you so much for this time. If you have time in the future, please come to the Azure Emperor City to play. Gu Chen and the fairy cupped their fists at Yun Nuoxing and laughed softly. Yun Nuoxing was stunned. You are from the Azure Emperor City? Gu Chen grinned. Azure Emperor City. You will know who we are when you come. Yun Nuoxing scratched his head and said with a strange expression, Oh, I really have to go to the Azure Emperor City after some time. When they are done with their cultivation, I will leave for the Azure Emperor City. I am very interested in the Immortal King Valley. Brother Yun is coming too? The fairy covered her mouth and laughed. When you come, we will entertain you. There are many people who are coveting the Immortal King Valley. Then we will meet again after some time. We will return to the Azure Emperor City directly. The two of them did not hesitate after Gu Chen's words sounded. They waved their hands and turned around in a free and easy manner, after which they rushed toward an enormous teleportation door. After waving the things in their hands at the guards, they entered the silver-blue light curtain and disappeared. Yun Nuoxing lowered his head. Below the platform of the teleportation gate, there was a 3-meter-tall signboard with the words, Thousand Flows City, written on it. Looking at the 3 words, Yun Nuoxing was stunned for a moment. He calmly opened the treasure map and found some new markings. He had already marked the cities that should be in this era on the treasure map. After that, he found the Thousand Flows City at the top right corner of the Kuan origin region. It was about a few 100 million miles away from the Azure Emperor City. Glancing at the teleportation gate, he discovered that the Azure Emperor City was right beside the Thousand Flows City. Those two seemed to have entered the wrong gate. Those two fellows should be fine, right? Calmly keeping the treasure map, Yun Nuoshing stared at the sky and sighed. In the faraway Thousand Flows City, Gu Chun and the fairy came out of the teleportation gate. Seeing the unfamiliar scene, they couldn't help but be stunned. The two of them stared at each other for a while. Gu Chun, sister, did we enter the wrong gate? The fairy nodded in a daze. There is no gate to return home in the Thousand Flows City. Then should we run back and take another turn? The fairy glanced at him. That would make him laugh to death. Who told you to act cool and handsome? You still want to turn back after acting cool? Gu Chun raised his head and looked at the sky, his mood complicated. Why don't we have a cup of tea before we leave? The fairy sighed and nodded. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.